requests and deployments, and finally alliances as well. Just before we get into the meat of the substance, there are some outstanding matters which I think we warned you of prior. If you can just give us a couple of lines. Ajax has been a concern. We know this is something that you've been focusing on as well. Can you quickly give an update as to where we are with this, your own investigation on Ajax?
Not just a concern for you, Chairman, as you know. We are very, very focused on Ajax. The health and safety report is out to maximisation at the moment. I'm keen to see that out as soon as possible, and it will be published in full, as I promised to the committee. We have ongoing work in terms of the trials to ascertain where the vibration is coming from, and also to test potential mitigations and the root cause for the noise. That is all work in progress. I've tried to maintain a regular drumbeat of updates to the House through WMSs and to notify the committee. I will continue to do so on that.
I'm very grateful for that, and you have been extremely helpful in keeping the House informed. It'd be great to do an oral update next time, if that's possible, so we do get an opportunity to speak and react to it as well. The second question was to do with accommodation buildings. There, I understand, are over 750 defence accommodation buildings that are still cladded with combustible cladding. Could you update the committee on what we're doing to address this post-Grenville?
Happy to. I take a very close interest in it because of my responsibility for the defence estate, although there's another minister who is leading day to day. If I misspeak on any issues, I will write to the committee. But to give you the update you're seeking, there are 20, so we've got, as you know, a vast number, I think 98,000 buildings in total. 38 are high-rise, 27 of those are high-rise with external wall systems and with residential use. There is a programme going through to ensure that we know what can be done to remove the combustible materials. It's not always cladding. In one case, Peninsula, which they are investigating today as we speak, I believe, is actually wood as part of the composites. It's not traditional cladding. I think it's only a small minority that are fully clad. The vast majority are actually 22 out of the 27 are at Faz Lane, and they have got cladding to the internal core and to the top floor. But each of these requires separate mitigations. The one thing, and we're going through each in turn, the one thing on which I would like to absolutely reassure the committee is that there has been, as you'll appreciate, all these buildings are occupied. They're all SLA, not SFA. So they're all the residential units for active trained personnel. They are regularly drilled. I believe in all, but certainly the vast majority have got active alarm fire systems in place. As you'll appreciate, there are a regular put-through of barrack inspections and also regular checks through our defence and fire services to check that all mitigations are in place that should be in place, and they are fit to operate under defined FRA. So there's fire regulations to do with each of these buildings which are adhered to whilst we go through the process of working out what we do in each of those. It may not be that the cladding needs to be removed. If it's partial cladding, it may not be it needs to be removed, but there may be other mitigations in terms of cavity installation or compartmentalisation that needs to be put in place. Okay. It is not a simple issue, but right. It is being gone into.
Thank you. Comprehensive reply. Still some questions there as to out of 755, when will the actual programme of renovation be completed? Perhaps you could write to me with more details, including what you've just mentioned then, so we have a full update. I'd be grateful.
I will do so, Chairman. In some cases, it will be work in progress. It will be telling you when we will get the reports on which we can base our solution. But and the focus has been, for understandable reasons, on the initial 6 floors and above, high-rise. HCLG changed its guidance in January 2020 to say all residential, so we've reflected that. But I'll give you an update on the whole thing.
Very grateful indeed. Let's just turn to GE. John Speller, do you want to take this forward?
Yes. You'll be aware, Minister, that the committee's written to the Secretary of State expressing our concern that GE might be selling EDF, the facility at Rugby that makes turbines, including, of course, for our submarine fleet. What engagement, if you're the department, had with GE on this? Do you have any concerns about it? And because part of the UK submarine manufacturing infrastructure being sold, particularly in the current climate, to a French company after the issues that have been very publicly aired about the UK-US Australian submarine deal. Submarine agreement.
Thank you, Chairman. So first of all, to reassure the committee on one point, you, Chairman, and the committee have been very concerned, I know, in the past regarding the propulsion business, and I'm just pleased to confirm on the propulsion business that there's a guarantee in place that is absolutely there till 2024 at the very, hopefully going on from there, but there's a guarantee being put in place in terms of the propulsion unit. The steam unit is separate, it is different. At the moment, I don't know, the department doesn't know exactly what GE plans, exactly what the scale of any sale may be, and indeed whether that sale will go through. We have received absolute assurances from GE that they will be briefing us fully on what they have in mind and the security implications. So I don't know yet whether I've got concerns. Is it a matter of concern? Yes, it is. So we will want to make certain that we are reassured on what is planned, what is being sold, and what the implications may be. So we will certainly go through that. As the committee knows, we've got powers under the Enterprise Act, if required, to intervene. The Department of Business, I should say, has those powers. We in Defence will take a close interest, and it's impossible to add more until I know what the details of that transaction may be.
But have they indicated to you that they will give you early sight of their proposals rather than just notifying you of a done deal?
We've had an assurance that they will be giving us full information, and I think the implication of what we've been told is that that will be in advance of anything being concreted, signed, or indeed delivered.
Can we also be clear that the department will frankly take a closer interest in this than they did in the propulsion system, because quite simply, until this committee became engaged, there was no interest by the department at all?
I can't answer to the department on that. I don't know what interest is taken, but I can assure you that a deed poll, which is legally binding, has been signed by GE in relation to the propulsion system, and that guarantees it.
But there was no interest from the department when this was being mooted. And indeed, it was only when this committee, and it was only, in fact, when the company was coming on the morning that they were going to be interviewed here, give evidence here, that they actually changed their minds. So it did actually require the department to take an interest, which, quite frankly, they didn't before this committee took an interest.
As so often, Mr. Chairman, I'm better informed as a result of Mr. Speller's contributions. What I am aware that we've had the contact. I am aware that we'll be looking at it very closely. I can reassure the committee on that. And the committee should also be reassured that when the new NSNI Act comes into force in January, there is far wider requirements on industry to report transactions rather than us having to conduct our own due diligence and voluntary reporting. So the regime is, I'm pleased to say, being strengthened as a result of the recent Act.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks very much indeed. My final request is just to do with some outstanding requests for information to do with this very naval inquiry. We're still missing a number of requests. We'd be grateful if we can get in touch with your office and make it clear which ones those are outstanding. And you can.
I'm very sorry if that's the case, Mr. Chairman. I was not aware that things had not been furnished to you that you required, so we will see what is outstanding.
Yeah. They cover plans for transitioning to new vessels, maintaining Type 23 availability and submarine availability. So we're still waiting for those to be submitted to us.
I think things like submarine availability, the department has always been fairly cautious in terms of what is put into the public domain. But let me chase up, Chairman, and we will come back to you.
Scrutiny and oversight, of course, is important, no matter how deep the submarines may go. Okay, turning to...
or not go.
Okay. Right, let's now focus on the substance of this committee hearing, the Navy and purpose and procurement. John, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, look, over the next decade, we'll be replacing or upgrading most of the main surface and subsurface vessels in the Royal Navy. What are you doing to address the risks that are possibly inherent in so many major concurrent transitions?
I'm slightly aware that I've got First Sea Lord here, so I'm sure you want to hear from him as well. But if I can start off, I think this committee would have been warmly supportive of what the MOD and the Royal Navy has done in terms of the increased drumbeat of orders for surface shipping. There is always inherent risk, particularly in first of class, but with the way industry is working with us on Type 26 and Type 31, we are doing our utmost to get those in on time and on scope. The very positive news in terms of the Type 31s, Babcock's did all their milestones to date. We've got the steel cut done for Ventura, the first of class. They're making progress at BAE on Type 26. So we've got a demanding schedule, but that's because we're putting bringing a lot more surface vessels into the service of the Royal Navy. The objective is to ensure there is no capability gap, that the new type that Glasgow, the first of class of the Type 26 ASWs, comes in to match the coming out of service of Westminster, the first of the Type 23s ASWs to come out, and that we have the Type 31s coming in on a regular basis again to replace retiring general purpose Type 23s. Although the Type 23s themselves have had an upgrade, and they are, post-upgrade, good to remain in service for some considerable time. I don't know if First Sea Lord wants to say anything about the transition.
So I suppose the only thing I would add, so unsurprisingly, we welcome the capital investment, and it is substantial through the whole of this decade and stepping into the next decade. And then for us, I think the backdrop of some things already having matured, so the carrier programme coming to life now and having both carriers operational, the 5 Batch 2 OPVs all being deployed, and then the Type 45s as a mature capability but being invested in to address some of the propulsion concerns. And then you have the Type 23s, as Minister said, also being invested in to give them a much longer life. And that then allows us to start the frigate transition. So Type 26s come in to allow us to fulfil our ASW capability as the Type 23 ships start to be paid off. And then the Type 31s come in to replace the general purpose Type 23s. And again, that's a steady drumbeat. And one of the big things for us is ensuring that we have the crews to take on those ships, because there's an element of a slight double bubble running on the existing ships, starting to crew the new ships. And we have a very positive recruitment over the last 3 years, so that feels good. And then there's the capability transitions that also feels very comfortable in terms of how we step through this throughout the decade. And if anything, probably the more challenging one is in the submarine area, and how we continue to introduce the Astutes.
Right. Can we just stick to the surface fleet for the moment?
Okay.
We'll come to the subsurface separately.
And the only thing I'd add in on the surface fleet is then, of course, it doesn't end with Type 26 and Type 31, as you saw in the IR. We then have concept work ongoing on the Type, or just beginning on Type 32, and we should then come in to increase the size of the surface fleet as we go into the 2030s.
Have you had assurances from industry that both in terms of skilled and professional engineering workforce, but also in the resilience of their supply chain, that they will be able to maintain that drumbeat?
One of the things that I most worry about actually is skills, is making certain we have that skills gap filled. We have had the benefit of a lot of work with industry as to how we can meet any skills gap that emerges. I was with BAE in Govan last week and was delighted to hear their plans for a skills academy based there. They've got sign-off from their board to have an academy which would not only support their own needs, but that of the wider shipbuilding industry. I was delighted to hear that. The work we're doing with the MES, which initially was based in Gosport, has now become a UK-wide endeavour, and also the Maritime Enterprise in Scotland. There's a lot of focus on it. I think, Chairman, Mr. Speller is absolutely right to refer to this as a key issue to ensure our delivery. But I think it will happen. Industry are determined to make it happen. And I think it also requires investment. So things like the work we've seen at Babcock, putting up the new conditions for working within a shipbuilding hall. There are similar plans in BAE, the increased digitalisation of the workforce, that the the scale of what they do. I don't know if the committee's had a chance to see what's going on with HMS Glasgow at the moment. It's worth a visit. The way people are using digitalisation to ensure that they are incredibly efficient at what they do is deeply impressive. But skills is absolutely an area we need to focus on. He's absolutely right.
The concern that there is, though, you don't.
Yes, I want to come on to our fleet support in a second.
You've mapped out what's happening. You've got an absolutely exciting time for the Navy. There's no doubt about it in wider terms. But there is a concern that you are actually retiring Type 23s early. You know, the Montrose, Monmouth, Argyll, and so forth. And your new ships are not coming in time. So there is a capability gap. And then, of course, you've got maintenance and training and so forth, separate from operational. That is the concern that we're seeing, is that two Type 23s were retired early, and the first, you mentioned HMS Glasgow, doesn't come in until, is it 2028?
We hope 2027, but with COVID there's always issues. And actually before that we should have Type 31s coming in. But the point is availability, and we're both fighting over who's going to answer this question. But I'll give First Sea Lord the opportunity to have a crack about Monmouth and Montrose, how it doesn't affect our availability.
So thank you, Minister. I can understand how it starts to sound like alchemy when we are paying off two ships and we're actually saying that we will have more availability. But that's because when you looked at those two ships' programmes and the money that we were spending on them and what we were going to get out of them versus extending three other Type 23s, HMS Argyll, HMS Iron Duke, HMS Lancaster, when you then look at that, we get more ships available for operations. So there is no gap that you referred to, Mr. Chairman. We carry on with the same number of ships that we've got today over the next couple of years, and then in 2024 we start to increase in the numbers of ships in terms of the frigate destroyer fleet that are available, and then that continues to grow throughout the decade.
Okay, but you currently only have Type 23s. You have 8. Is that correct?
So we have 12 Type 23s, of which we have 8 available for operations.
Okay, and then Type 45s, 6?
Type 45s, we have 6, of which we've got 3 available for operations, and that will grow to 4 out of 6 on a consistent basis from 2024.
Because that's the resilience issue that we're talking about. There's always going to be, out of any 3 ships you've got, chances are you're only going to have 1 operational ready to go at any time, or possibly 2, 1.5. You know, that's the you can't have obviously half a ship. The point I'm saying is that because of training, maintenance, deep fits, and so forth, it takes out a third, 2/3 of your fleet at any time.
Traditionally, it always did. We're looking to grow the availability much more strongly than that. So the traditional view was that a ship would be available for 60% of the time. That aligned with the way that we crew our ships in order to give people both their leave and some home base port time. I think if you recall, we're adjusting some of the ways that we operate our ships. So HMS Montrose in the Gulf, where we rule the crews through so that we have that ship available far more of the time. The Batch 2 OPVs have a 1 in 3 watch system that allows us to have those ships a lot more available. And we're looking to do that with far more of the fleet. Yeah. And then with a modern fleet to look at getting 80% availability out of those ships. Yeah,
we'll stay on frigates and destroyers because OPVs are, I'm afraid, a different class. You know, you would not put them into harm's way in the same way that you can with frigates and destroyers, if we're honest. Kevin, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, but there is going to be a gap, isn't there? Because you're talking about number of the hulls, but the capability of a Type 31 to take over responsibility of what some of the Type 23s can do, will not be able to do it, will it?
So, in terms of the Type 23s have 2 main roles. We call them they've got a general purpose ability as a frigate, and the Type 31s absolutely fulfil that role. And then the other Type 23s have an ASW role, where we're looking to the Type 26s to replace those Type 23s that are specialised in ASW, and that's partly how do we manage the fleet so we can invest in Type 26s, which are at a high end of ASW capability. How can we maintain a frigate destroyer fleet of 19 ships, and then how do we look to grow that further when we introduce Type 32?
That's the problem with all this, isn't it? Is I agree totally with what you've just said, Admiral, but the point is, if you're going to be retiring Type 31s with 23s with the ASW capability, you can't replace that with Type 31s, can you?
We'll replace that with Type 26s as they come through.
Yeah, so yes, but several years later, you can't have it both ways.
No, so, Mr. Chairman, the idea is that the first of our Type 26s, Glasgow, will be coming in to replace Westminster, the first of the ASW Type 23s to go out, and then we'll match it ship by ship. So we retain that ASW capability on the Type 23s until they are retired as the Type 26s come in. That is the... Chris, I'm right to say that. So I absolutely understand the concern. That is what we're doing to try and prevent that concern taking place, matching the retirement of capability with capability.
Is that a guarantee? That's not what you've told me in parliamentary questions. And
I'm horrified if there's any difference in what I'm saying now and what I'm saying in the parliamentary question. So we will be hoping to get...
Can I just say, Jeremy, what the problem I have with this? I mean, I think it's got into, and I understand why politically we've got into, is this figure we've got to be seen to have the 19 frigates and destroyers. Now, yeah, you can have 19 minis. Doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily do the same as 19 Ferraris. And that is the problem, isn't it? And what you're saying is that it's going to be seamless from the ASW ones going out 23s to 26 taken over. Can you give that guarantee?
That is what we intend. Whenever you're producing a first-class vessel, you get nervous about giving guarantees. So, Chairman referred to a 28 entry date for Glasgow. 27 is meant to be the entry date for Glasgow. But, we've had COVID, we've had all kinds of things. I don't know whether, Chris, you would want to be able to give more reassurance. Whether we're in the... You can give a cast-iron guarantee on behalf of the Royal Navy, because that's what Mr Jones is after.
I don't think... Thank you, Mr Chairman. I don't think I can give a cast-iron guarantee. What I can say is that the frigate transition plan we currently have in place matches the out-of-service dates of the ASW Type 23s with the planned in-service dates of the Type 26s as they come into service. Equally, for the Type 31s replacing the general-purpose frigates, one of the reasons why we're driving Babcock so hard, and the deal that we have with them is 5 ships off contract by 2028, is to ensure that we have as seamless a transition of the general-purpose frigates, for which the Type 31s are a really good match, as they leave service.
Can I just add in a little bit more on the capability side? Because so as well as going from 19 frigates and destroyers with the Type 32, potentially we then get up to 24 frigates and destroyers, and I accept there are various capabilities of those individual ships. But when you look at this through an ASW lens, I think we've got to acknowledge that we've introduced P8, so that makes a big difference in terms of how we are shaping the ASW battle in the North Atlantic. We have newer submarines in the Astute class, that makes another difference. At a more sensitive level, we're investing in some of the underwater sensors, and we continue to have Merlin Mark IIs and the way that they contribute. And then there are some other of the research programs that we're doing with the Americans where, again, we're focusing on underwater capabilities.
But, I agree with all that. But in terms of the general purpose Type 31, you wouldn't put it really in harm's way, would you?
Yes, we would. So it's got sea scepter system, yes. And then I think we might get on to this debate as to it's got a gun. It's got some other self-protection measures, and then I think part of the debate that we're having is it's going to be fitted for Mark 41 launchers, but not with at the moment, and then that starts to become part of our lethality debate, particularly around a surface-to-surface weapon. And do we extend that programme to include the Type 31?
Okay. We'll come on to weapon systems shortly. Kevin, is that right with you? I think Mark wanted to come in here. Mark?
Can I just say one last thing about skills? And it does worry me, actually, about skills in terms of our shipbuilding capability. When we watched a few weeks ago, I sat next to a Canadian general who was very interested about what they've done in terms of the nation, in terms of their Type 26 programme. And it's reassuring what you've said, Minister, but can you just say what the government are doing on this? Because certainly speaking to Canadian Admiral, The Canadian government took a very clear, hard-nosed look at the skills gaps and where they were and put money in as well. Are we doing the same?
We are, through the Maritime Enterprise Zone and the MES. We will get on to it, but the National Shipbuilding refresh is published later this year. I'm sure that will make reference to the skills that we need to have in order to have a flourishing shipbuilding enterprise. But it's also making certain that people are aware in their local communities what shipbuilding involves at the moment. I had real pleasure, and I mean this, to meet the conveners at Govern, the trade union conveners, and they made the point that as people drive past, they're delighted to see Glasgow Out being built. They're proud that it's happening. They're delighted to see it being built there at Govern. But would they want necessarily to be out there in all weathers doing that work on the ship? And it's only a minority of them would say yes. So we do need to put investment in terms of the halls that are there, in terms of the physical infrastructure to support the build, and also to get over to people.
This isn't pulled the frigate factory 10 years ago. You might have got that.
Okay,
but that's
we need to press on because we're only on question 1 and we're gobbling through time. Mark Francois wanted to come in quickly on this.
Very quickly. Look, it is said that when Secretary of State took over, he gave each of the service chiefs one key priority. He told the head of the Army to sort out recruitment, he told the head of the Royal Air Force to sort out the MFTS, and he told the head of the Royal Navy to sort out availability. So far, it's not sorted. Looking at the alchemy, Sir Vice Admiral Gardner, you talked about a perfect handover on paper, but some of those Type 23s will be 30 years old by the time that they come out of service. How confident are you that they're not going to break when HMS Diamond broke CG21? This all works providing nothing goes wrong, and the history of availability in the Royal Navy shows that lots goes wrong very often.
Yeah. So, with regard to the Type 23s, what we have done is we've invested a lot of money in their life extensions, fundamentally, including upgrading their power and propulsion systems going forward, and we've put C-Scepter into them and 997 radar. So we have planned to invest in those platforms to see them through to the end of life and to make sure that we can marry that up with the ships and the capital investment we're putting into new ships coming into service, which of course will be significantly more sustainable and supportable from day one because they won't be suffering from the same sorts of levels of material fragility and obsolescence.
Yes, but we've got reams of parliamentary... I don't be talking time. We've got reams of parliamentary questions that show that the ships break more frequently than you estimate. So why suddenly is there going to be this miracle that nothing breaks for years?
I'm not saying that. Ships will always suffer from defects, and we deal with.
But
those
your plan doesn't
defects.
allow for that.
I'm not sure I entirely agree with you. I mean, if I look at CSG 21, for example, we're hitting an availability target in excess of 90% at the moment. And that includes the unfortunate and unplanned defect in HMS Diamond.
We'll come on to that in a minute.
Half the ships are not British. That's a separate matter. Mark, are we okay? We're going to come back to the subject in a later question.
So, look, very quickly, this is not alchemy. This is fool's gold. And let's deal with the world as it is, not the world as we'd like it to be, on an MOD PowerPoint presentation. And perhaps we could do the rest of this hearing on that basis. Is that all right? Chairman.
Right. Let's just want to touch on RFA. Mark, John, do you want to quickly touch on that one?
Yeah. Could you just update us on how the Navy plans to plug any capability gaps from the retirement of RFA Argus, and also to mitigate the risk that the fleet solid support ships won't be available in time to replace current vessels? And indeed, could you give us an update on where we are on ensuring that the fleet solid support vessels are going to be built in British yards?
I've had a sense of déjà vu there, Mr. Chairman. I'll happily answer that.
Déjà vu all over again.
But firstly, I'll just take on Argus. On FSS, that we made great progress. And I think it's worth reminding the committee where we were a few years ago on this, which is that reserved for British build were warships, aircraft carriers, frigates, destroyers. Under the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister, we have a different policy and a more nuanced policy in terms of what the requirements are. We've certainly taken the view that we need substantial UK involvement in the FSS. That came out of the lessons coming out of CSG and the importance of FSS to the fleet as a whole. So we have a a procurement process with 2 phases. We looked forward to getting the manufacturing phase kicked off in May 2023, which is 2 years after the initial procurement of the design phase. We've got 4 consortia involved, all either exclusively UK or a blend of international and UK partners. The build will be, I'm confident the build will be substantially in the UK with all the integration work undertaken in the UK. I think it gets us the best of both worlds. I think we have the opportunity to see what's out there in terms of international design to ensure we have the very best of kit to put in the Royal Navy's way. I think it will help ensure that we get an FSS in to service as soon as possible. We're very focused on the 2028 date in which RFA Fort Victoria is due to retire, and it will help upskill and deliver work and talent and opportunity to our UK yards.
Okay.
And Type 31 is a good example of how this has worked in the past.
Let's stay on the RFA. Any other questions on that?
So can we be clear? Will there be a capability gap? Yes. And will they be built in British yards?
I'm absolutely. So the integration will take place in UK yards. And there'll be a substantial amount of build in UK yards. I can't say more than that at the moment because it's an ongoing process. But as I say, the integration will be done
Surely,
UK
Minister,
yards.
integration means that you build the sections elsewhere, possibly abroad, and then you bring them together and you bolt them together.
Integration involves bringing together elements of the ship, and I'm certain that there will be a substantial UK build as part of that process. But we are still mid-procurement, so I can't say more than that. I'm focused on the 2028 date for the RFA Fort Victoria's out-of-service date. We believe, having tested the market, that it is entirely possible to have the first class of FSS into the hands of the Royal Navy before RFA Fort Victoria retires. But to Mr. Francois' points regarding PowerPoint presentations and reality, I can't swear to that because we still haven't got anyone on contract. And until
it's fair to say that a new Fort Victoria class is not being built yet, and you want to terminate Fort Victoria by 2028. You've not started building this one yet. The aircraft carrier doesn't have any support as we currently have at the moment. We are in danger of not having any fleet solid support at all after 2028 if we don't get our skates on.
Well, the current out-of-service date is, as I say, 2028 for RFA Fort Victoria. It is fair to say
that suggests you might have to. You're nodding, so you might have to extend it and keep it alive.
We have the current out-of-service date of 2028.
Okay.
But there's always flexibility in those. But there's always also the hope of getting an expectation on the market engagement that we get the first of class of the new FSS in before that date.
Okay.
What I would also say is that there are other means we've discovered that we can use in terms of CSG. Yeah. If we didn't have any capability at all, CSG would be able to carry a lot of the stores required within the hulls of the actual CSG.
We don't. Make it clear. We do not have enough capability right now. To have one Fort class is simply not enough, because if that Fort class isn't working, who's supporting the aircraft carrier right now? It'll be, I'm presuming it'll be other NATO allies that'll be doing the support. I don't want to get too ventured down on here. Sarah, did you want to come into this one?
Yes, please.
I wanted to reply to that.
Sorry, Minister. RFA Argos is
coming after Sarah's point.
Hospital ship. What plans have you got to replace that when it retires in 2024?
I promise that one's first.
So at the moment there is a potential gap from 2024 onwards. We're looking at a range of mitigations. So one of them is to extend Argus, but that would be a relatively modest extension to 2026.
Okay.
Another one is then to start to look at how do you provide a Role 3 capability, and do you do it in a slightly different way? So less of a bespoke ship, more similar to what we've seen with our field hospitals on land, where you look at, from a ship-going point of view, containers, and can that provide some of the capability rather than having it designed into the ship. That then starts to link with both the FSS programme and then the programme that follows on from FSS, which is called the multi-role support ships. That's at the back end of this decade. And does that then allow us to reintroduce the Role 3 capability? In the meantime, we'd have to acknowledge that we are limited to purely Role 2, and then having to link in with what might be provided from shore. So there's a potential gap, and we're looking at various options at the moment to try and ease that gap.
All right. Thank you. But there is a concern and a theme building up here that yet another ship may need to be extended because of the pressures that you're under at the moment. I want to move on. Was there?
I just wanted to ask, what about the fire on Fort Victoria before she deployed on CG21?
She did have a fire. That was quickly put out. That then involved her having to have some maintenance before she sailed. Then she caught up with the rest of the task group. And the other piece, and there's no doubt.
The Dorset Press Admiral reported that some personnel were taken to hospital with smoke inhalation and other injuries. Is that true? Because that to me sounds like more than just a fire in an ashtray.
I'm trying to recall the precise details. In terms of, was this a...
Happily provide your office with the press cuttings.
No, if it wasn't a major fire. If you're saying this was a major fire which then hampered Fort Victoria and was a big delay on the task.
I'm saying it was a fire on what is already an extremely old ship.
Yes.
And some people were taken to hospital as a result.
Yes.
I'm just making the point. She's already on her last legs as it is.
Okay. We'll come back to Fleet Storage Report because Kevin's going to return to that in a second. I just want to ask a very basic question, Minister, to you first. And I think I've asked this before, but I'm hoping the answer will be consistent. In the next 5 years, do you think the world's going to become, on current trajectory, do you think the world's going to become more stable, or is there a worry that it might become less stable?
I think the worry is it'll become less stable.
All right, thank you. First Sea Lord, specifically in the maritime environment, given what the Minister has said, would you concur that part of that instability will absolutely be affected in the maritime space?
Yes, definitely. And what we're also seeing is a shift to a preponderance of state threats and the severity that those state threats involve. That's the other piece that I would add to that stability issue.
Okay. With that in mind, and I think we all agree, certainly this committee is of the view that the next 5 to 10 years are going to get pretty bumpy indeed. Why is the government reducing the defence budget as announced in the Red Book on page 40 last Wednesday?
I don't think that's right, Chairman. We have a £24 billion increase in the amount of cash being spent invested in defence. That was announced as part of our spending review last year, and that will come into play over the next 4 years.
So I put it to the Treasury Minister after I spoke in the debate on Wednesday, and he confirmed what I said in my speech was correct. There is a 0.4% reduction in total TDAL, as illustrated on page 40 of the Red Book itself.
I'll have to reacquaint myself with page 40 of the Red Book, but from the work I've looked at it, there is a 1.5% increase annually in real terms in defence spend over the period of the spending review. So our numbers clash, and there's actually been an increase.
They don't clash, because the number you're referring to is actually in the column next door to the column I'm reading out, which goes back a year, and then when you include last year the 16.5 billion that was added, then yes, you do get a smoke and mirrors impression that defence spending then does slightly increase. I'm talking about today. For the next 4 years, defence spending is reduced by 0.4%. Now, my concern is, if we're saying the world is going to get more unstable rather than less, it's going to get more dangerous, and as we've just talked about, the maritime surface fleet is absolutely critical to that. You've got a new aircraft carrier coming on board. We want to see more frigates and destroyers. You're going to have to make some cuts somewhere.
Well, Chairman, I think we need to go away and just study the numbers, because I think that smoke and mirrors is it depends where you take your cut off. So what we are looking at in defence is over the period of our spending review, a 4-year period in which we've got a £16.5 billion increase over what we had set out, a £24 billion increase. And in real terms, that is a significant increase in the in defence spending over that period.
I hear that,
and in addition, we have got extra.
Let's make it clear. I'm sure that those of us who sit where you are would want to make sure that you do your best to see the budget increased. But I'm spelling out to you, and I hope that you will now quietly go and back and speak to the Treasury and ask questions, because when you do want to increase frigates and destroyers, when you add a Type 45 destroyer or a Type 23 frigate, you're adding about 11 million to 13 million respectively each year. You're not going to be able to do that if there's any form of cuts in the budget. You simply won't have the facility. The money will not be made available. This is resources we're talking about. Okay, from a capital perspective, yes, 16.5 million. That, I think a lot of it went into the nuclear submarines, the CAS-D. It was a requirement for that because there were some problems there. That's understood. But from a resource perspective, then the MOD is going to be up against it over the next 4 years.
We have had extra Ardell being provided to the MOD, happily, about 700 million.
1 second. Let the Minister finish, and then, Kevin, you can come in.
So we and I'm pleased that the Treasury has recognised inflationary pressures by increasing the Ardell that's going to be available in the outer years. I think there's an extra 700 million a year for the last 2 years in that period, which is a recognition of the inflationary pressures that we are seeing, and I welcome that recognition. So I think the equipment plan, which will be published in due course, will have a matching amount of the equipment we intend to acquire, what the costs of that are, and the total sum of resources available to the department.
Okay, my final point before I just hand to Kevin, because this is important and goes to the crux of to the concerns that we have. Absolutely, we want to see naval capabilities, and you've actually illustrated this. Going the tilt to the South China Sea, you went to the Black Sea as well, you've got the Mediterranean, you've got East Africa, you've got the Caribbean, you've got the Arctic, you've got offshore Britain. There's an awful lot of pressure on our 19 frigates and destroyers plus other ships to make sure Britain is safe. But you're not going to be able to do that with increased instability when you actually cut the resource budget, which is our day-to-day operations, separate to the capital budget, which is what you want to spend on future equipment. Would you agree with that?
What I would say is that we have got a huge investment in capital and equipment, and the resource budget is adequate to ensure that we maintain the crewing and effectiveness of those additional resources. So, like every other part of the economy, what we're looking at is how we can be most effective. So we may get onto it later in terms of the crewing requirement for our vessels. Look at the number of people we have on our aircraft carriers compared to the 6 times that number in the US equivalents. So there is a resource needs to be managed effectively. Do we feel we have a sufficient envelope for doing that? Yes, we do, and we've got to make certain we wisely spend the additional CDL that we have.
Okay, if you want the committee's support in going to the Treasury to try and get these figures addressed, I'm sure we'll be there with you. Kevin?
Well, I've got the figures here. Ardell budget, 21-22 to 2024-25, minus 1.4%. CDL budget over the same period, 1.8. The total is a 0.4% decrease, and that's before you take into account the inflationary pressures on the actual budget. And the concern for me about the Ardell budget reductions is that's the Admiral's ability to actually get sailors onto ships and support them. People.
It's people.
And I'm not sure he'll admit it, but he knows that the Navy has been screwed, frankly, over the last few years in terms of its numbers. Its numbers are very tight now. If you're going to then reduce the budget down even further for that, how on earth are you going to actually provide more of those people for all these, so you can have as much kit as you want? You haven't got the people to actually provide it, support it and actually use it. It's pretty useless.
I think firstly Lord would like to chip in.
So the Ardell budget for us involves three main elements. So
when you say us, you're talking Navy?
For the Royal Navy,
no,
but
right.
I think it's true of the whole of Defence. So it's people, it's support, Chris's world in terms of the maintenance and the stores and spares, and it's then activity. It's true to say that of those two budgets, there is more pressure in the Ardell budget than there is in the CDL budget. Yep. But in terms of our yes, and it probably is a constant. In terms of the plans for the Royal Navy and the growing size of the Royal Navy, becoming a carrier strike navy, introducing some of these new capabilities, and can we do that? Absolutely. Do we have to rearrange the way that we've operated in the past in order to better match the Ardell budget? Then yes. So that's where So can we reduce the number of people in our headquarters? Can we reduce the number of shore billets and put more people into the front line? Can we run our ships differently? Can we have a transformation programme in the support world and how we wring out better value for money there?
Admiral,
all of those things.
Yeah, but you talk to the same people as I do in the Navy, and you know at the front line, the Navy, it's very tight.
It is very tight, but that and we've had gapping, but all of those what we call operational pinch points, which extended to the end of this decade, 28, 29, all of those are coming left. Now, some of that is shift some of the people from the shore footprint to the seagoing footprint, better tackle some of the skills shortages, and also increase our recruiting. And when you start to put all of those into place, that's the way to tackle the gapping on the front line. And we assess at the moment that we will then come what we describe as into balance in 2023. And that's accepting the budget position, which for me, I've got a budget at the moment which is just under £7 billion, and then that grows to just under £8 billion at the end of the spending review period. Yeah, so there is a sort of matching to ambition and resources.
You're also going to come under pressure the next few years on inflation. And we all know defence inflation is actually higher than actually normal inflation. So that's going to be pretty eroded very quickly, isn't it, if you've got inflation at 5+%.
So I think we'll have to wait and see whether or not what we're putting into place does that beat those inflation pressures. But what we're seeing at the moment is we can absolutely match the capital investment with the crewing, the support, and then the increased activity. Okay. And I go back to several years ago. We were having the same conversations about HMS Prince of Wales was being built much more quickly than HMS Queen Elizabeth, and you're not going to be able to crew the second carrier and so on. Well, I delighted in having that as a problem as Second Sea Lord, and then we've been able to do that. It was the same with, would we be able to run on the Batch 1 OPVs? Yes, we have. Okay. So I think we've got a track record of doing better than some of the concerns.
We made the point, Minister and First Sea Lord and Admiral, I think the British people agree the world is getting more dangerous. They would also like to see, because of that, Britain be able to defend itself. If I can politely say, the better case you make to the British people that we need to invest to protect ourselves, they will be with you to make sure that these numbers are in the positive and not in the negative. I think we've milked the subject enough. Let's now move on to procurement. Kevin, over to you.
National Shipbuilding Strategy and the refresh and the Dunn report into terms of prosperity was its main focus was to make sure we've got a steady pipeline of work through the UK shipbuilding industry. Now, you trumpeted the great fact that you've designated the FSS as warship. Some of us were actually arguing you should have done that like everyone else did right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting how quickly you've designated the it's not a royal yacht, is it? National flagship as a military vessel. So I'd love to know how you get around that as well. But can I ask, in terms of the FSS, why is it that you've invented, basically, this spurious competition of four things? And you've also said in your response to earlier, is integration would take place in this country. There's not a commitment there, is it, to build these things in the country? And if you look at some of those consortiums, frankly, it's quite clear what's going to happen. They're going to be, the main work share is actually going to be abroad, not in the UK. It might be assembled here, but that's all that's going to actually happen. So why is it you're not following through on what was actually in the National Shipbuilding Strategy, that slow drumbeat of work? And I refer back to looking at the Americans and the Canadians who get this. Why don't we get it, even when it's been spelt out in the strategy?
Well, the strategy, I think, preceded us taking the decision we did on the FSS. So it was after the National Shipbuilding Strategy of 2017 that a competition was launched, which was an international competition for FSS. It's under the current Secretary of State that we looked at that again, and we realised quite appropriately that we needed to have a greater degree of certainty of the good security reasons of UK content. And so that is the approach we've taken on FSS. It's not a spurious competition. There are 4 consortia.
Come on. Some of those companies haven't even ever built, I think, this type of vessel.
Which ones are you referring
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. You've put them together, and there are some very good on design, and it's quite clear what you're going to get. You're going to get a foreign design, basically, put together, might be assembled abroad, might be done here, or integrated, as you say. But in terms of long-term sustainability, in terms of supporting UK shipbuilding, this ain't going to be the way to do it, is it?
I'm absolutely convinced this will deliver real value to UK shipbuilding, as well as delivering good value to the Royal Navy.
But there's no other country in the world would do it this way.
I'm not certain if that is true. There are very few countries in the world that have the equivalent of FSS. If you look at what we've done with Type 31 with an international design, but one which we've made our own, its entering service as Type 31. We already have one export order, and I think there'll be more to come. So I think there is not to be the methodology that we're using. I'm absolutely convinced is the best way of ensuring we get the best design for the Royal Navy, that we get it into service as quickly as possible, and that we see real work and skills in UK shipyards. But I'm being pointed out by First Sea Lord that I'm eating this Gardner's lunch. So I don't know if the Admiral wanted to add anything in on FSS.
Well, I was just going to agree with you, Minister. I mean, I think actually we've got the basis of a really credible competition here, and conscious of the fact we are in the middle of a competitive process. And I think all 4 bidders, are answering the challenge that we've put in front of them. And of course, social value is a significant part of the overall evaluation criteria for these vessels going forward. And it is all about, under the banner of the National Shipbuilding Strategy and the pipeline we're doing, about how we're going to invest in plant, how we're going to invest in people, and how we're going to invest in skills.
What percentage then is going to be done in the UK of these contracts?
Well, that can't be stated at this current moment in time, because we're in the middle of that process. So,
no. But you're
Mr.
the
Chairman,
minister.
you will understand.
No, hang on.
I've said a substantial amount.
But you're the minister, right, who've signed up a national shipbuilding society about supporting UK shipbuilding. You've signed up to the prosperity agenda in terms of Philip Dunn's report. If I was sat in your shoes, I'd be wanting to ensure as much as possible of that is actually done in the UK.
Wasn't that why they were designated as
and that's
warships?
A reasonable point to make. But in the middle of a procurement process, you're not going to draw me any further, Mr. Jones, I'm afraid, as to exactly what that proportion will be. There is a competitive element to this.
Right. Well, I beg to differ. Can I come on to...
Would you mind just very briefly, Minister, I think you're right to say that there will be value for the Royal Navy and value for the country, but that's the wrong premise from which to start, because value seems to be the totality of the thought process. When there was a failure to designate FSS at the start of this process, it was all about pounds, shillings and pence. But do you accept that if we get good value, that doesn't necessarily mean that we get the throughput and the establishment and the continuity of skills within our shipbuilding strategy? And that's the element that when we hear integration in the United Kingdom, we fear that we will miss out on all the great investment in people and skills that the National Shipbuilding Strategy from Sir John Parker envisaged at the very start.
We need to ensure, and that is why social value is a very important element, as the Admiral referred to. We need to ensure that this does inject greater reassurance and skills and design expertise into our industry.
If that is solely around integration and then subsequent maintenance, we have missed a huge trick.
I did not say it was solely around integration or maintenance. I did say that integration, all 3 vessels would be integrated in the UK, but that's not the limit of my ambition.
Can I ask then, in terms of, I can't remember what it's called now. It's not a royal yacht, is it?
The national flagship.
National flagship. I mean, where does this fit into because we've had the Prime Minister now designating a warship, which would be interesting to know why it is being designated a warship, so it's built in Britain. Where does this fit in terms of 2 things? One, the pipeline of work. Secondly, in terms of where is it coming out, whose budget it's coming out of. And I'd be interested to know from the Admiral in terms of how it's going to be crewed. Shall
I kick off on that? And then, so it is a national flagship. It will be flagged with the white ensign. It will have Royal Navy crew and officers on board. Under WTO, actually, there is a security exemption, and the security of the vessel is incredibly key to how we think about it. Well, given the nature of what it will be doing, I think it is important. There are security ramifications around that, and that's something which we take very seriously. So there are absolutely legitimate reasons under WTO why this should be, why we can direct this to be a UK build, which it will be. And then in terms of the payment of it, yes, it is coming out of the MOD budget. I would remind you, don't need to remind the committee, that prosperity is a defence task. It is absolutely right, if we're going to have a national flagship, that the MOD will be absolutely front and centre and core to the delivery of that national flagship and its projection of global Britain. And it will come out of the MOD budget, but it's around about 0.1% of the MOD budget for the next 4 years. So there's still money, but it's
what's going to give?
A budget that's just been cut by 0.4%.
I mean, what's going to give? And the other thing, I'm sorry, I see no need for it at all, because that's what the Royal Navy do very well with their existing ships in terms of port visits, in terms of promoting Britain. So what's going to give? What's the cost going to be in terms of running? Because the running costs of this, in terms of crew as well.
You may want to come in terms of the expected number of crew and associated costs. But I think we shouldn't forget that as a country we spend a lot of money every year on trade pavilions, on trade support, on boosting our trade presence.
Minister, I don't want to be rude, but we need a quick answer. We need to move on from this. So if you can answer Kevin's question about how much will it cost. Right, we get the bigger picture of all these other things. How much will this cost to run?
Navy do already.
So I think it's in the realm of sort of 20 to 30 million, but we'll have to wait to see.
That's more than a Type 45 and more than a...
No, in terms of the overall cost and the crewing and all of the maintenance and support, we're waiting to see. And then the ship's company, we anticipate it's in the realm of 50 to 60. And then that is... to some of those tasks get assisted by both the Royal Air Force and the British Army. And in a navy of over 30,000, is that something that we think that we can absorb? Yes, we can. If we're going to have a national flagship with a white ensign, then the anticipation is that it will be crewed by the Royal Navy, and that's something that we will look to do.
But in terms of the payment of it, this is a cross-government, when it's in service, this is a cross-government asset. It will fulfil vital roles for not only MOD, but for FCDO and DIT and other departments.
What's the capital cost of it?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Capital cost of building it.
The capital cost is paid for by the MOD.
No, how much?
The Secretary of State has said between £200 and £250 million, which is roughly 0.1% of the defence budget for 4 years.
Okay.
What's given in the budget then to make way?
We haven't need to find a give. There is enough for a 0.1% per annum commitment. There is enough that we can do to make certain that this can be additive.
If it's going to cost 30 to 40 million a year to run them, what's given in your budget then, Admiral?
Whatever the running costs are, there is that's not necessarily an MOD bill to pay. This is a cross-government.
Good luck with that if you're trying to get it out of other departments.
Will it be in the equipment?
Well, there is, as I say, other departments do spend a lot of money in supporting our trade and our ambitions around the world.
Will it be in the equipment plan?
A good question to which I do not know the answer offhand. I should remember, but I can't remember offhand.
Well, is there anyone in charge of procurement we can talk to? Is it in the equipment plan or not?
I am ultimately in charge of procurement.
If it's 250 million, it's got to bump £250 million worth out of the equipment plan for something else. So if it's not in the equipment plan, it makes a farce of the process, doesn't it?
It will be fully funded, and I will make certain that I come back to you on exactly that.
Minister, with respect, that's not the question I asked you. I didn't ask if it would be fully funded. I asked if it will be in the equipment plan, if and when it's ever published. Will it be in the equipment plan, yes or no?
I regret that in preparing for this committee, I did not read through the latest draft of the equipment plan that is sitting on my desk. If I had, I'd been able to answer that question. I can't at the top of my mind. I suspect it is in the equipment plan, but forgive me if I don't know that at the top of my head. I will write to the committee and confirm.
You've got some stuff behind you. Maybe they can do some homework and then feed in some information by the end of this session. We've got another hour to go. Mark, I don't want to make that. We've got other questions to come in.
Just text Abbey Wood now and get the answer before we finish.
I made that request, Mark. Can I just ask one final question on this? You're designating it as a warship.
He doesn't even know what's in his own plan.
Okay. Can you tell me, will there be Royal Marines on board, and how will this ship defend itself?
I did not say it was designated as a warship. What I said is that there are a number of exemptions under WTO which can require build in a certain in a home jurisdiction. And
I thought was the clarification that allowed it to be classified to be built here, because it then was a warship. But
I haven't said either yes or no to that answer. So that question. So
maybe you can pass that back behind you.
There are a series of rationales as to why under WTO you can actually designate a build.
How does it defend itself?
So,
does it require another naval ship to escort?
Well, in all circumstances, you would depend on a threat assessment at the time. So there does not. So we're not going to get into any defensive suites that may or may not be incorporated, but any threat assessment will be taken on the. So
you signed a trade deal. Where was your last trade deal that you signed?
Personally,
yeah.
Well, it depends. Trade deals tend to be. I have signed various MOUs with...
Was it not in Ukraine, in the Black Sea? So you could have taken this flagship to the Black Sea to sign this. Would you argue that that should go through the Black Sea without another escort? Or will it be self-contained, it'll look after itself?
As I say, in every circumstance, there'll be a threat assessment made.
The point I'm trying to make is, I'd love to have a flagship. I think it'll be fantastic. But needs must, pressure on budget, yet here we are having... with all the maritime requirements that we currently have, we're creating a new one for the flagship to have an escort, which I think is where this is actually going to go in certain circumstances. That takes one of the frigates and destroyers, the 19 that we have, away from their other duties.
But if the flagship went to New York, would it require an escort?
No, that's what I'm saying. In some cases...
In some cases. I think we totally agree that in some cases you would require an escort.
Okay, I think we
don't believe in it.
I do. I think it would be fantastic. I look forward to having it. I think it would be fantastic for global.
Let's move on. Let's move on from one ship that's yet to be built to another one, the Type 32. Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, you mentioned the concept work on the Type 32. Now, I will be honest. I'm on a fact-finding mission to find out what this T32 is. So perhaps you could tell the committee your understanding of what the concept design is for this, and how is it unique to, say, the T31 or any other surface fleet vessel?
Well, a Sea Lord will come in, unless he wants to send it to the Admiral. But what I would say on Type 32, on all these things, everything is changing very rapidly. So one of the things we're very conscious of, Type 31s and Type 26, so we'll get onto this with lethality, the kit that we'll be using in the future is going to be very, very different to what we're used to at the moment. So if you look on FCAS, in terms of future combat air systems, with swarms, with loyal wingmen, it will be a different world. And I'm very conscious that anything we say now may change during the course of the concept phase. And firstly, Lord, I don't know if you want to address that or Admiral Chris.
So we're just kicking off the concept phase now. In terms of it, is it going to be an ASW platform, or is it going to be an AAW platform, or is it going to be more in the general purpose frigate? It's in the general purpose frigate class. Does it have a wide spectrum of what it might be at the moment? Absolutely. And is it, the debate that we had was, is this really a Type 31 and just call it a Batch 2? Well, that could be one answer. Or in the world that we're in, where the technology is moving on so quickly, should we challenge ourselves as to whether or not this could be a very different ship, and that this then has a lot more automation, it has a lot fewer ship's company, and it has a lot more in terms of some of the new technologies, whether that's drones or directed energy or some of the other the weapons that are coming through. And that's why we've now started the concept phase in order to better understand what those choices are.
What are your timelines?
So the timelines for this are towards the end of this decade and stepping into the 2030s. So from my point of view, this is about a frigate destroyer numbers that we've heard before about that are sort of anchored around a 19 figure that potentially start to grow to 24 in the early 2030s. And that makes a substantial difference to the Navy. And if I look at the earlier debate that we had about 60% availability and potentially having 80% availability in the future, that gives me twice as many frigate and destroyer days than I currently have. So this is a substantial change.
When you're feeding into the ideas of the concept that you want in a decade's time, are you looking at capability gaps or are you looking at new capabilities, or both?
This is more about additional volume in the fleet. And then in terms of the capability gaps, it's about embracing the technology that's out there. So my wariness about some of the programs that we've had in the past, which get initiated and they take forever to deliver and they're fixed, is that you can't ever introduce the technology which is moving along at a faster pace than either you're designing or building the ships. So this is an attempt, rather like we did. If you look at how long it took to initiate Type 26 and then build Type 26 and bring it into service, compared to Type 31, the speeds are hugely different. It's the same with Type 32. Can we start to accept that the correct way to build our ships is to have a lot more flexibility, and you introduce the technology almost as you're designing and building them, rather than something that was cemented in aspect as it was 10, 15 years ago, and then you get the wrong capability too late, and it's not good enough in terms of what we need.
So you're learning lessons from the T-31 frigate factory concept.
Yes.
Are you looking at a modular programme or a persistent operations deployment system, or is it too soon to say?
I mean, it's both, fundamentally. I mean, what we want this platform to be is agile and flexible, and where it can be rolled to meet the specific mission requirement. And that's fundamentally part of the thinking that's going into the concept phase at the moment.
So the Russian-Israeli corvette, punchy bit of kit by all accounts, well armed, speedy, adaptable. Are you looking at that?
That would be one. That would be part of the option set. So if I take Type 26, one of the best things about Type 26 is this enormous mission bay that can take 16 containers. One of the other best things is that we haven't decided precisely what is going to be in those containers and what will go into the mission bay. It's the same with Type 31 and it's the same with Type 32. We're trying to avoid us over-engineering and deciding too early when I think selfishly we want to maintain the amount of choice that we can have for as long as possible, and a level of ambition that allows you to embrace more lethality and at the cutting edge of technology in a better way than we have done in the past. And that does mean that we don't have easy answers as to this frigate will look like this in 10 years' time. It's a deliberate saying this will be a platform which will be able to host, ideally, a different set of capabilities that we can swap in and swap out, but will be much more modern and much more lethal in terms of what it can deliver.
So the two themes that this committee has regularly come back to us on in terms of modularity and ease of spiral development, that's exactly what we want to embrace in the future naval procurement.
And this is the same approach for the T-83, just replacement.
Well, that's going to be more exquisite. So, but it's just very hard. We're talking then about something in the late 2030s?
Sorry, Chris. Type 83 is
Type 83 or the future air defence system, again, we're in the foothills of trying to start to examine what is the option space to meet the future capability needs of the Royal Navy. And I genuinely cannot say hand on heart today that I have a clear view of what that will be, apart from the fact that we need to take the capability we've got today and work out how we evolve it and develop it to make it fit for purpose for the future. Okay. And it becomes more about the system and less about the platform.
Well, the first thing to do is to make sure it's got some engines that work.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, we got that one? Good.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Can I just say I think the Type 32 is a very exciting project, because I think you and I, First Sea Lord, had a conversation when you were Second Sea Lord when I was Minister, and I got my phone out and said, if that was your ship, it's the apps on the phone which then become the interesting thing that make the ship so modular. And I'm really pleased that we're heading in this direction. What I would say, though, is I used this comparison before, if the maritime fleet were a chessboard, we have the expensive pieces at the back. We don't have enough pawns. And for the very reasons why we've been speaking about before, upstream engagement, force projection, just familiarity and frequency in which you're going to move across the South China Sea to freedom of the seas and so forth, you need a lot more of the pawns rather than the expensive pieces. With a radio, obviously, capability to defend themselves, call in support if need be. The upstream engagement around Africa with our Commonwealth friends, Type 32 seems absolutely the thing. I'd love to see the Royal Navy double in size with a a Type 32. I hope that's something in direction. I have one question.
That's why we have so embraced. But just to mention, I know you know it, but having the Batch 2 OPVs, fourth down in the Falklands, Medway in the Caribbean, Trent coming out of Gibraltar, Tamar in Spain, the Pacific, that is providing that projection which I know you're looking for.
You would never send a Tamar through the Taiwan Straits, would you?
Not if you wanted to come back.
Not if you wanted. It would be a one-way trip. Anyway, we don't want to digress around that. I have one question on the Type 32. Who first came up with the number Type 32?
So I'm trying to think whether it was me or Second Sea Lord or something. So there were, could
it have been somebody not in the MOD?
I don't think it was. If I'm really honest, when we were the Secretary of State asked us to individual service chiefs to pitch at the Tower of London. We had a debate about Type 31s and whether or not we said that we were building a Batch 1 and what we should be doing is building a Batch 2. More from a marketing point of view, we felt that didn't describe the conversation that we've just had. That actually we should be demanding that the new batch or new class is substantially different from the previous one because of the pace of technology. Okay. So we deliberately avoided let's put a bid in for a Batch 2 of Type 31, let's try and describe it as a new class of ship.
Now, forgive me, I thought perhaps it might have been a typo, but clearly you've given justification. Mark, do you want to quickly come in here?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And we'll come on to astute in a second. But talking about the surface fleet first, some people have described the surface fleet as being like porcupines. In other words, they're quite spiky. Our surface vessels are quite good at defending themselves, but they've got a very limited ability to inflict punishment offensively on anybody else, certainly compared to their Russian and Chinese counterparts. How do you respond to that criticism?
So I think that much of that is very, very fair. We want to have a more lethal fleet in the future. So if I look at some of the things that we are introducing, whether it's the upgrade for Type 45, whether it's the introduction of Sea Scepter on Type 23s, the F-35 becoming a Carrier Strike Navy, the introduction of Astute class, all of those are improvements, but they don't. Not all of them carry the punch.
None of those answer my question. None of them. Sea Scepter is a defensive system, Astute's a submarine, and the F-35 is an aircraft. What are you doing to improve the offensive capability of the surface escort force?
So just on that last one, so F-35, Astute, they all have increased offensive capabilities. But on your precise point of that, I think the problem that we have is focused around Harpoon. Harpoon goes out of date in 2023, and we're having a debate. Do we almost take a sticking plaster approach of an interim surface-to-surface weapon, which might have what I would call a relatively modest range and might stretch to being land attack? Or do we accept that we might have to have more of a gap and go for a more substantial offensive weapon? And we do that in partnership
Mark,
with
we're come on to
other nations.
Weapons specifically shortly. Do you want to move just to subsurface, if that's all right?
Okay, but I'd just like to know when we get to that, you can tell us whether whichever option you've got is in the equipment plan. Okay? Because if not, the plan's kind of meaningless. Right. Subsurface, Astute. Arguably the most capable attack submarine in the world. Will give a Virginia class a run for her money any day of the week. Horribly late. Because of that, we've had to run on the T-boats very expensively. We've got 2 left in service. That's not classified. Our availability is very poor. It's a classified number which we can't discuss, but it's not a big number. So yet again on availability, we're falling down, aren't we?
So availability... So I would disagree with you on the surface ships availability. If we want to go back
we
there.
moved on to Astute.
But if we go to Astute...
Now we'll come back to surface ship availability in a minute, I promise. Let's do the submarines that don't go to sea.
So the submarines, we have 4 new Astute, and we're waiting for the 3 further new Astutes to come in.
Yes.
We're managing that lateness with the run-on of the T-boats.
Yes.
Our overall submarine availability, I think we would agree, is weak.
Yes.
When we've made international comparisons, both looking at the Australians and their diesel fleet and the Americans and what they achieve, we're on a par with both of those. And then what we're trying to do is, with the capital investment, with the new Astutes coming in, and then as we shift from Vanguard to Dreadnought, again, rather like the surface fleet, to improve the availability. And that is a big effort in terms of the Royal Navy, the Submarine Delivery Agency and industry. And if I give you some simple examples. So when I was 2SL, we would start maintenance periods, and the biggest complaint by our warrant officer engineers was that we didn't have enough of the spares ready at the start of a maintenance period. We were struggling with a figure of about 50% of the high priority spares at the start of a maintenance period. We now have over 90% of those spares at the start of a maintenance period.
You were robbing Peter to pay Paul. You were robbing spares from one boat another one could go to sea.
Yes.
So the taxpayer says, why have we spent £1 billion on a new submarine, but we haven't got any spares for it, so that we have to rob parts out of another £1 billion submarine, so this £1 billion submarine can go to sea?
So I think
if you're two blokes having a drink in a pub, you go, that's bonkers, right?
So I think that was more accurate several years ago. So if you look at what we've done, we've invested a lot more money, to the tune of about £50 million a year from the Navy Command budget, to increase the number of spares for our submarines. That's made the difference. That to me, it was deeply depressing that we had these engineers who wanted to fix the ships, who had the skills to fix the submarines, and they were spending most of their day chasing up the spares. Yeah. We've adjusted that, so we now have over 90% of all of these spares ready on day one of the maintenance periods. That then starts to knock on, unsurprisingly, to a smoother maintenance period, and then that's part of the programme about how we get more availability.
We're tight for time. To be clear, a lot of the programmes were down to Rolls-Royce because they screwed up the production of the reactors. They moved the reactor production across Derby. It was an unmitigated disaster. You can't build a nuclear submarine without a nuclear reactor to put inside, right? So it wasn't all BAE Systems' fault. And we've been to Barrow, and to be fair, they are trying to catch up. I think it's important to put that on the record. But we still have issues that we haven't solved, and I'll choose my words carefully. But sometimes when people have come to visit us, we haven't been able to receive them properly in the way that we should have done. How long will it be before that is rectified?
Trying to if it's more of a tactical question, and one of my primary responsibilities, which is to provide a nuclear deterrent for the Prime Minister,
yes,
and to ensure that is invulnerable.
Yes.
I am absolutely confident that we have maintained that patrol in the same way that we have done for the previous 52 years, and that continues to be invulnerable. And I actually would go further to say some of the investment that we have made has made that less vulnerable than it was even a year ago.
And we're reassured,
yeah.
But you've talked repeatedly, rightly, I think in this committee's view, about the increased contestability in the North Atlantic.
Yes.
Because of increased Russian submarine activity. Right? How can we play a part in that contestability if we haven't got enough submarines? It's a simple question. So enough serviceable submarines.
So I don't. So I definitely agree that if, and I think the Secretary of State is in a similar position, that going forwards, when you look at the transparency in the world and the way that is going to influence the way that we fight, the underwater domain as this remaining stealth domain is going to become even more important. And you're also right to say that that's becoming a more contested space. The ASW side of this, though, is not purely with submarines. It's with P8s, it's with our Merlin Mark IIs, it's with our towed array capabilities. We have benefited from some of the increased ASW activity, which has helped us to grow some of the skills back that we probably had 10, 15 years ago. And then the way that we are approaching it tactically is, as well as those investments, is linking with our international partners. So the Striker group of nations...
Lord, I don't want to eat other people's time. I'll just ask you one more question, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
When are we going to materially... I'm not talking about P8, I'm not talking about Merlin, I understand the integrated battle, we've all got that. When are we going to materially improve the availability of our nuclear attack submarine fleet, please, sir? Just answer that one question.
That will happen in the next few years as the new astutes come in.
In the next few years?
Yeah, it will. But at the moment, it's on a comparator with the other principal submarine navies in the world.
So your argument is if they're pretty poor at it, it doesn't matter if we're poor at it.
No, I'm just saying that in terms of, just trying to give you some assurance that if you're looking to, how are we doing? We compare with other navies in the world. Do we have an ambition to do better? Absolutely. Are we meeting our tactical objectives? Yes. Is the North Atlantic more secure, and do we have more freedom of manoeuvre than we have done in the last few years? Absolutely. Do we think in the future the investment that we're making means that we continue to have that advantage in the North Atlantic, and does it grow? Again, the answer is absolutely.
Right. I think the committee's got the point, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Let's move to emerging technologies. Gavin.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, do you accept that there's a barrier in the Navy procuring and bringing forward new technologies?
I would certainly hope not. I mean, I think they would be, they can speak for themselves, but they'd be very proud of the fifth generation aircraft carriers, fifth generation F-35s that they have. I also see, in terms of the seed core of potential new ideas in Navy X, some extremely exciting projects. Things like the autonomous mine clearance, that's £1 billion project over the next 10 years. That would be absolutely state-of-the-art. So I think there is a desire to recognise and bring on. We have over defence as a whole $6.6 billion being spent on R&D, which is proper Fiscati principles. So that's going to fail. So the idea is that you do try things, you see if they work and they don't work. Things like investment in Northern Ireland, the directed energy weapons is a classic case where this is something where we think the time is now right. We can get a usable DEW system which could be deployed in due course. But this is all cutting-edge R&D stuff. I think, Chris, you'll be able to talk through RAPSO and what the Navy does in terms of that turning ideas through into the proper kit.
Yeah. Minister, forgive me, but Minister, you did mention mine clearing, and I think with the exception of mine hunting capabilities, this committee has been informed that there is a huge barrier in DE&S. New technology being brought there and rarely or frustratingly slowly coming out. Do you recognise that at all? Is that something that steps are being taken to address it? Perhaps maybe, sir, it's time for you to come
I mean, I'll be honest, I think we have been historically slow at bringing new technologies to the table. And I think that is one of the things that we are actively trying to address. We're doing it jointly with Navy Command through Navy X. I did it day one when I took over this job as DG Ships. I set up an Innovation and Future Capabilities team because of that very, very problem, and they are actively working that. More broadly, DE&S has just set up a Future Capabilities group. So I would say that we absolutely recognise that we need to change the way we think about how we bring capability to the table much more agilely and swiftly than we have done in the past.
It's a real problem, and it's something I really wrestle with, which is that in the past, so 40 years ago, we're going to buy a new bit of kit, was probably about 5 companies that you can do it, you get them in a room and you talk about it. And we all know that given the way procurement's going, it may be 2 people in a flat somewhere in Belfast, Edinburgh, East End of London who've got the cutting-edge idea that's going to get us that solution. How we make certain we open up and are open to hear those, that's a really difficult process. So through DCIS, we want to be very open in terms of the capabilities that we're looking to acquire. So it can't be the case if anybody has a bright idea, they'll turn up at Bristol, knock on the door and be given tea and biscuits, and they'll spend 3 hours going through their idea, because they've got to be focused on what we're actually trying to procure. How do we ensure we communicate to everybody? And I'm putting work into this in terms of the refresh of the SME action plan. How do we ensure that everybody can have clarity on the areas that are of interest to us? So constituency MPs come to me and they say, it's so frustrating. This brilliant SME in my constituency, they've got this fantastic idea. Why the hell can't they get in to share the ideas? In some cases, there's good reasons for that. But I've had circumstances where people swear blind that they've been able to get access to the Pentagon, indeed get product through to production and into service in the US, and haven't been able to get into the MOD. And there's something going wrong with that's happening.
Well, I'm smiling just as how the answers to that question evolve, because when I asked to start with any barriers, I think the answer indicated no. We brought forward Queen Elizabeth class, we brought forward F-35s, we brought forward mine clearance capability. So I'm glad there is a recognition that there have been barriers, and thank you.
I didn't recognise the depth of the question, Mr. Robertson, but I do now do.
Having just considered submarines, there's no depth that we cannot descend to. Just on the uncrewed mine clearance capability, will there be use of a mothership, or will it be a land-based capability when they come into use?
So it'll be deployable from both, and again, as part of the overall future shipbuilding pipeline, we're looking at what sort of mothership capability will come, potentially through the multi-role support ship proposals to provide that capability. We're also looking at rapid procurement of existing vessels at the moment to provide some early capability and the ability to do some experimentation and trialling.
Will there be any impact on the presence in the Gulf with Opkipian?
We have active plans at the moment to deploy the systems to the Gulf from 2023 onwards.
And I guess we have new capacity and technology groups within DE&S and within the Royal Navy. What percentage of the budget is dedicated to emerging technologies?
I don't know the answer to that question without going and checking, I'm afraid. So.
I do know that we have on the overall MOD, it's not the question that you're asking, I appreciate that, but we have 6.6 billion being devoted to R&D overall, and a proportion of that is being pushed down to the TLB, so Navy X will get its share, and they will be doing innovative work for emerging technologies. But I couldn't give you it on a TLB basis. The overall number is 6.6.
Minister?
Yes.
For the nature of this inquiry, given that it is so focused on Navy, it would be useful to have.
So what you'd like is a steer on the amount of money being devoted to R&D and emerging technologies for the Royal Navy and its capabilities.
Thank you, Chairman.
I mean, thanks very much indeed. We spent a lot of time talking about the big equipment, the platforms themselves. I just want to turn to the munitions that we use, because arguably they are just as important, if not more important, because that's what does the damage. Could you just clarify to the committee the difference between what the F-35B carries under its belly compared with the United States?
Cool. I'm happy to do it.
Do you want?
Well, I would have talked about the Sea Scepter coming in, Spearcat 3 coming in 2028, I think the date is for that, about the integration of Meteor. So there are different capabilities between the two platforms, but in terms of the current capabilities compared to our US allies?
So we've got AMRAAM, we've got Paveway, we are looking to go down the Spearcat
Paveway 4
and looking to go down the Spearcat 3 route. And we're also looking to introduce Meteor, and some of those are in tandem with match some of the US capabilities, and some of the US capabilities are further ahead in terms of our program.
Okay, in our arsenal we have Storm Shadow, Brimstone, and Hellfire, which have been, I think, the mainstay of our capabilities, particularly on land attack. Was there a reason why F-35 chose not to go down that particular route?
So I think where we are at the moment is that we have invested in F-35 for its stealth capabilities and for what it brings to the overall battle space. The armaments are catching up with that, so it has more offensive capability. And in the meantime, we're like, I think, a lot of F-35 nations, where if you see F-35 as being the way to defeat the enemy air defences, the mass of the weapons that will be delivered will continue to be delivered by fourth-generation aeroplanes, but they will be flying in less contested airspace, and therefore we're still reliant on our fourth generation for delivering of the ordnance, and that's where the mass still lies.
They don't fly from aircraft carriers.
No, can I just finish my bit, Mark, and then I'm happy to hand you.
But they don't.
So on Typhoon, is that now able to operate the Storm Shadow?
Yes.
You sure?
Yes.
The Mark III?
Yes.
Okay, and that was a retrofit in order to be able to do that? Yes,
and with Typhoon developed a whole series of capabilities over its life. But on to Mr. Francois' point, the notion that we would be at a warfighting scale operating unilaterally and not either with linking with our Air Force and our land forces and space and cyber forces is one element. And then the other element is the international dimension, where we will be blending our capabilities with those of our international partners, particularly when it's at a warfighting scale.
I just want to move on to the Type 26 and the Type 45, because Type 26, you've got Sea Scepter that's coming in, is that correct?
Yes.
Surface-to-air range of about 25 kilometres, and then you've got a future anti-ship weapon yet to be decided?
Yes. So what we've got is a Mark 41 launcher, and then if I go back to, and we've got Harpoon going out of service in 2023, and we've got a capability conversation, which is, do we bring in a relatively modest surface-to-surface weapon, and by modest I mean it doesn't have a very long range and it's not hypersonic. And if so, how much does that cost? Well, it might be as much as £250 million just to allow us to have 5 sets for 3 ships. And then when would that be able to come in? And it looks like the earliest we'll be even able to bring that in is 26, 27. So I think that then means, that's why we paused what we called the Interim Surface-to-Surface Guided Weapon Programme, in order to force us to say, is the correct thing to do? We accept that there will be a bit more of a gap as Harpoon comes to the end of its life. But where we really should reach out to is hypersonic weapons and weapons that have plus 1,000 kilometres range.
Okay.
And do we do that with our international partners? And in particular, that's when you start to look at the future
We'll come on to our alliances in a minute, because this is actually quite critical, because interesting to get your reflections on the Carrier Strike Group, because you were doing a lot of things with other nations as well, who have a different set of weapon systems.
Yes.
But simply put, there are 4 categories, I think, of weapon system that you could use in the maritime environment. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's the surface-to-air. There's the surface-to-surface, so anti-ship. There's the subsurface, so for some form of torpedo. And then finally, there's a land strike capability. Would you agree with those? Would you concur?
And there's the only other one I would add in is air to surface. So whether that's in a helicopter, but those are relatively light weapons, or whether you have a heavier weapon in an aircraft.
But those are the platforms you bring to the mothership.
But in terms of surface platforms, you're right.
My concern is, in the spirit of modularity, that even with the ships that are coming online, we are still unable to hit things deep inland, other than using your Mark gun on the front. And I would encourage, Minister, you've grasped some procurement issues in the past. Please look at this, because if we are going to invest in a Type 32, to have missile silos, which are ubiquitous, that are able then to take a suite of missile systems which you slot in depending on the threat and the task, to be able to do all 4 of those missions, that would be, I think, a welcome direction.
Yes, so I think, Mr. Chairman, I think your observation is one that we share. That is why I think the real conversation is, do we towards, and it's probably the earliest it would be is 2027. I think realistically it's probably towards the end of this decade, whereby we then start to get into land attack and long-range surface-to-surface missiles from our suite of ships. That's Type 26 with the Mark 41 launcher. That's a debate about Type 31, which is fitted for but not with the Type 31 launcher. And then it's to complement the submarine fleet in terms of what the Astute provide with Tomahawk. But it's exactly as you outline in terms of the direction that we're looking to go down.
To go back to those strikes that took place in Syria, when I think a one-off strike that we participated in with the United States and I think France as well. So we had a choice of either using, I think, tornadoes, the Tomahawk, or indeed the Storm Shadow. We have only one vessel that can fire Tomahawks, and that's submarines at the moment. Yes. The United States, the Arleigh Burke, the Type 45 destroyer, it's standard fit. So my question is, as we move forward, we have these that work. We have in our arsenal. How come we're not utilising the ability to fire Tomahawk from all our ships? or something equivalent to that, a range of over 600 miles.
I think you're absolutely right. Sorry, Chris, you want to come in?
No, I was going to say, I mean, that fundamentally is the reason why we've invested in the Mark 41 launch from Type 26.
So we will, for new vessels coming forward, that is very much front of mind.
You don't know what that missile or family of missiles will be to go. You're just simply building the silo right now, is that right?
We want to ensure that we have the capability to launch missiles of that nature. What they will be as we go into the 2030s is another matter entirely, but we have the capability.
And that same missile silo will be in the Type 32 and the Type 83?
Well, we don't know yet, but it would be logical that or similar characteristics would be very much considered as part of the concept phase.
Yeah, and what I was going to say, and the path that we as a navy want to go down is absolutely that longer range missiles from ships with land attack. Yeah. And to Mr. Francois's point earlier of, okay, is that in the programme? That is in the programme with money that's been allocated for the future cruise anti-ship weapon, but we have not yet, we're only on the cusp of an assessment phase with the French. We haven't delineated that it's going to be weapon X, but we have got the budget line that supports that approach.
Absolutely.
Because, very quickly, if it's the hypersonic variant, it might be beyond the 10-year equipment plan. If it's the, quote, simpler harpoon replacement, yes, it probably, if you're talking 26, 27, then by definition it must be in the plan. So just to make sure we've understood you first, if it's the shorter range one of the two, there's a line item in the plan. If it's the longer range one, it might be without the 10-year envelope, or no?
No, the exciting thing for the Navy is that the more substantial money is in the longer term line that might, with the ambition around the future cruise anti-ship weapon, the French partnership, that has got the money in the line. But I think I agree with you. If we're operating at the hypersonic level, there's a debate as to whether that's the back end of this decade or is it the early 2030s.
Very quickly, to follow the chairman's question, why can't you just if the Tomahawk, the TLAM goes in Mark 41, because you're not sure your new missile will go in the Mark 41, that's an issue. If TLAM goes in the Mark 41, why not just buy a bunch of TLAM now and drop it in?
So one of the other international options. So we've got an options with France, and one of the other options is what might be available if we were to go down an American route, and all of those we're looking at.
But to be clear, we've got a very strong partnership with our French friends, MBDA, and we work together very closely. There's a very exciting prospect in terms of the FCAS W, which is the Future Cruise anti-ship weapon. And we would look to having that's all within the equipment plan and priced in, and we would look to have that within this decade. But it's not yet to go through an assessment phase, so obviously you have other options.
What about if our opponents have the temerity to want to fight within the next 2 or 3 years? What do we do then? What if they're rude enough to do something and not give us advance warning? Because history has a number of examples. Pearl Harbor's one.
I think the First Sea Lord said it right at the start of this, that we have a large range of capabilities under the surface, on the surface, and indeed with F-35 above it. We would be working alongside allies and partners, and we would ensure that we have the right capabilities to meet the threat.
Hope to God you're right.
Okay, well, on that jolly note, can we move forward to look at the OPVs? Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. This committee, along with others, has raised concerns about the capability of the Royal Navy to meet current demands and future demands. And we're going to speak about the offshore patrol vessels, which we have 100% availability, which is really good, but turning out to be the pack horses of the Royal Navy with duties counter-terrorism, drug smuggling, Arctic, Caribbean, humanitarian, disasters, fisheries, and now you plan to deploy them in the Indo-Pacific. There are some concerns about how lightly armed these vessels are. They have a flight deck without a hangar. They have limited capabilities. Do you need more of them? Do you need to purchase more of them? Do you need to extend the life of the Hunt and the Sandown classes to meet the future requirements that the OPVs are now doing?
Can I take that? Yeah. So So I agree with lots of your points in terms of the what we're getting out of particularly the Batch 2 OPVs, but I would also add the Batch 1 OPVs, is this enormous utility. So Batch 1 OPVs assisting with the relatively basic homeland defence tasks close in, and then Batch 2 OPVs have given us a little bit more reach without having to always use expensive frigates and destroyers. So that's why, as Minister said, Medway in the Caribbean, Forth in the Falklands, Trent operating out of Gibraltar, that extends all the way through to working with NATO in the Mediterranean and in the Black Sea, and now going south to the Gulf of Guinea and supporting UK investment in that part of the world, and working with those navies in the Gulf of Guinea. And then we have Tamar and Spey that are doing what we would call constabulary operations in the Indo-Pacific. And this needs to be seen as being complementary to what else we have in the Indo-Pacific. So that one of the criticisms has been that if we weren't going to the Indo-Pacific enough, and then when we did go, it was wave a big flag, and then we wouldn't be seen for a long time. We're trying to say, right, we'll go with carrier strike, we'll go with high-end capabilities, we'll do that on an episodic basis, we'll link that in with our capabilities in Brunei, our facilities in Singapore, our base in Diego Garcia, and we'll link it at the western end of the Indian Ocean with a littoral response group. But further east, and particularly to work more closely with some of the smaller nations, to have 2 OPVs. And they offer what we call constabulary operations. Some of that could be a signalling, some of it is a permanent presence, some of it is being able to respond to humanitarian disasters, and it's about policing exclusive economic zones, policing maritime protected areas, working with other navies in terms of what we would call relatively basic skills such as boarding capabilities, and doing those low-end tasks. It's not to pretend that these are high-end warfighting ships and they don't have the armament for that, but they do signal our commitment to the region and our shared values and interests around whether that's territorial claims or it's supporting nations who are concerned with maintaining the levels of protein that they can provide for their nations, because that's the issue in some of the Indo-Pacific with the illegal fishing that's going on.
First, Sea Lord, to go back to my first point, are they being stretched too thinly? Do you need more of them?
So I suppose I will always say, it'd be wonderful to have a bigger navy.
This is your opportunity.
But in terms,
I can feel it. I can feel you want to say it.
I must admit. So do I want a bigger navy? Absolutely. But I think the real answer is: are we being asked to do too much by our ministers than we can achieve? And the answer is no. So what it's forcing us to do is to say, if you go into Chris's world, we want there's 2 batches, Tamar and Spey. The traditional approach was that you would send the ship and then you'd have to bring it back for its maintenance or for the crew to get their downtime in the UK. We contract with blue chip companies, and there are some fantastic facilities all around the world, so we want to deploy the ships and keep them there for at least the next 5 years. That means that we then have to have a different crewing model, and that also means that we can get far more out of those ships. So that's what we're doing. And then with our higher end ships, you can't have those crewing models, you can't have those maintenance support models, so you have a slightly different approach. But can we have a more balanced approach to both crewing and support and how we deploy our ships, rather than one size fits all? And that is allowing us to do a lot more. And we're doing that because we've got 5 more Batch 2 OPVs, and that isn't interfering with our core responsibilities in terms of NATO and the Euro-Atlantic. So I don't buy that we're under too much pressure and we're doing too much, and that's meaning that we're having to dilute in the Euro-Atlantic. We're able to do more because we've got more ships and a different way of operating.
Would your sailors agree with you?
I think so. I absolutely, because I mean, if you wanted to know what are some of the happiest ships to be on, it is sailors that are having the deployments of a lifetime. They're going off in Tamar and Spey to the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, across the Pacific, and operating in the Indo-Pacific. And they're doing it on on a routine that's probably closer to 4 months at a time. HMS Montrose is the most popular frigate that we have in the Navy because we've got a different crewing approach, which is 4 months on and then 4 months either to take your leave and additional training. And that gets to some of these fundamentals that I think we were getting wrong, which was the amount of churn and instability. So I think our sailors are content to be away, but they have been fed up with being messed around. So can they say whether or not they'll be back for their daughter's birthday or not becomes really important. And when they've said, I think I'm going to be back, and then for whatever happens, they miss that birthday, that's where we then start to irritate people and their families, and we lose too many people that way. So this is trying to respond to some issues that I don't think that we have responded strongly enough, and to crew the fleet in a much better way.
Admiral.
I mean, really interesting observations. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm going to try. You, in your reply to say, would you like a bigger Navy? You said yes. I think, Minister, you would actually concur with that as well. But can you do all the taskings that are set, that are required of you, that the Minister sets? Yes, you can. And then the Ministers realise the limits of what the Navy can achieve. But in saying that you'd like a bigger Navy, I think there's a recognition, going back to our stability issue, global stability, that you would probably like to see Britain do more on the international stage were there an appetite to do so?
The only thing I put in, Chairman, is, and the First Sea Lord is soon to chrysalis like arrive as CDS, and he'll be balancing all of the demands of the services and what the requirements are. What I would say is we should look at what we've got in terms of 2 aircraft carriers, a heavy investment programme rising to 1.7 billion a year in capital for the Royal Navy, exciting developments in terms of mine countermeasures, the investment that we're putting into our submarine programme. I think this is a very good time to be cheerful in the Royal Navy. If you ever asked any First Sea Lord whether they'd like more lethality and more ships, or more vessels, I'm sure the answer will always be yes. But do we think we've made progress? We certainly have. Can we do a lot more than we used to in the past? Well, the recent past, we certainly can. And is there ongoing investment? Yes.
With respect, that's one side of the equation. The other side is there's an awful lot of problems coming over the horizon, and are we ready and capable to meet that? And that is another bigger philosophical question, probably not for MOD, but for government itself to grapple. Let's move on to working with our allies. Gavin, do you want to take us forward?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose, I don't know if this builds on the cheery note or not. Minister, do you envisage us ever engaging in naval conflict by ourselves without allies?
I think if anybody ever said no, then that would be a very strange answer to make. I mean, you can never know what threats are going to be present. And you need to study all of the potential operational requirements. And there have been times in our lifetime when the Royal Navy has absolutely had to take on that heavy burden alone. But in terms of the scale of the threat we may have to calibrate against, there are some potential adversaries where it is far, far, far more likely that we'll be doing that as part of one of our very strong alliances. There are other circumstances where we would be acting alone. Would that be fair, First
Yes.
Lord?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, thank you. And in terms of those alliances and agreements that we may have reached with allies, do you have a clear understanding of what each individual ally would look to us to provide, or in turn what that ally could provide for us? Does the Department, does the Navy or the Ministry of Defence have a clear understanding, whether it's the US or it's a NATO partner, whatever it may be?
Well, the core of that, absolutely.
What we can provide and what they can.
Absolutely. Well, the absolute core of our defensive alliance network, the core of it is NATO, and there's the NATO plan, to which we have tasks which are allocated to each nation, and the Royal Navy has its taskings which it is meeting, and we will continue to meet our requirements as part of our NATO obligations.
I'm going to come back to the phrase core in just a moment, if you don't mind, but just in terms of that NATO operability, what work is ongoing about interoperability? Do we have allies that we know we couldn't operate alongside because their systems don't naturally align with ours. We went through a lot of this with F-35 at a time, and making sure there was engagement between, assets in the air and assets in the sea and assets elsewhere. So what about that interoperability piece? Is there ongoing work with our allies?
It's a huge, firstly it will come in, it's a huge issue across, not just nationally, but across NATO. So NATO does a lot of work in terms of ensuring not only interoperability, but what we're finding with the carriers is interchangeability as well. But
yes.
Firstly,
So our levels of interoperability with the larger navies within NATO are very, very strong, and I would argue very sophisticated, and they've been very enduring. They've been going for a long time. Are we an international navy that is used to working with other partners beyond NATO? Again, the same exists. And if you want to take the carrier strike deployment as a simple example, going out into the world to visit over 40 and exercise with over 40 countries over the course of that. But I would say that some of the exciting parts of this is that all through my career we have been striving to have strong interoperability. We're actually trying to set the bar even higher to what we call interchangeability. If you look at the notion that you have a US Marine Corps squadron of jets on board a British aircraft carrier alongside a UK squadron and comfortable operating together, comfortable with the command and control, the rules of engagement, and how you can project that force, and are you better for having that blended force? Again, that feels very, very good. If you look at what's happening in the North Atlantic, how do we maintain the freedom of manoeuvre for NATO and in particular for the UK and the US? Well, is that a UK submarine or is that a US submarine? And how can we operate together? That's interchangeability, so it's a level above what we've always described as interoperability. And then we have a whole host of programs with different nations, but some of those are very, very strong with America, and they're getting stronger, as you've seen, with the likes of the AUKUS deal. But then we've got arrangements with India, with Japan, with Australia. Again, it's a sophisticated way of doing business, and I think a highly effective way of doing business. And every time it messages to some of our potential foes who don't have that ability to marry with such strong allies. And so to me, it's something that we'll be using even more strongly in the future.
Thank you, First Lord. And I just wonder whether you wish to field this question or the Minister, but I said I would come back to CORE. And some of the evidence that we've received from MOD as a committee suggests that the Carrier Strike Group would always be deployed with a sovereign corps. What's the definition of a sovereign corps?
So the sovereign core is what we've said. I think the core capabilities that we contribute to from a maritime point of view are nuclear. So that ranges everything from the nuclear deterrent and the fact that we provide that to NATO, to our hunter-killer submarines, and then the supporting capabilities that go with that. So whether that's our intelligence, our ASW capabilities, the Merlins, the P8s, the way that we marry with some of the striker group of nations to fight the ASW battle in the North Atlantic is what.
So I'm considering our Carrier Strike Group.
But
so if a carrier is deployed alongside,
but on the core, what we've said with to ministers on the
carrier.
on the carrier is that we would have a sovereign capability so that we can always defend the aircraft carrier with UK ships and submarines. But that doesn't mean, and we would prove that capability so that ministers always have the assurance that we can protect the carrier ourselves. Whether or not we then deploy with a solely sovereign capability or we blend it with allies is a tactical choice at the time. Yeah. But we've always got the backstop that we can defend it ourselves.
So I'm not entirely sure what that means in practice with respect. You lead me to believe that ministers would always have the assurance that there would be a sovereign protection capability. And you mentioned attack subs, nuclear capability, intelligence, anti-ship, all of that. Right? But then envisage a scenario where those supplementary elements may be provided by allies, which doesn't then suggest to me that is sovereign core. So I'm trying to get an understanding of theory and practice, what sovereign core really is.
So in both theory and practice, Have we got 2 destroyers? Have we got 2 ASW frigates? Have we got a submarine? Have we got the support shipping so that we can say to ministers, if you want to deploy this carrier with a purely sovereign capability, you can do so.
One of them broke.
Sorry?
Diamond broke.
So have we got that capability? Yes, we have. Have we then? How do we then want to deploy? Do we want to go around in this sovereign core capability when everything tells you that if you ever come to a war-fighting situation, you're going to be doing it with your international partners and you'll be a lot more effective? Is a tactical choice at the time.
We're likely to open up into massive subjects. I think the concern here is that you don't know who your allies will be on the day. You've been doing exercises right across to the South China Sea with allies who may or may not turn up if there was a real operation to do. And that's the concern that we have.
You're absolutely right. What we tasked the Royal Navy is that we need to be able to deploy that carrier with proper defensive suites provided by the Royal Navy on a sovereign basis, so that we have the support under the sea in terms of ASW.
The concern is you don't have
and
that
in terms of air defence.
You don't have that 100% reliability to provide that support currently, which is why you had to lean on allies.
Well,
Chair,
that wasn't. We have the capability to provide that. You're talking about circumstances under which you may get maintenance issues on any one given moment on any one given ship. But do we have the scale in order to provide that? Yes, we do. Even now, before we have the PIP improvements and the increase in capability, we have 3 Type 45s available, and we have ASW capabilities available.
Okay. I'm just going to stop there because we're going to come on to that in a second, because Mark wants to bring it up, but Kevin wants to come in quickly, and then
the
Mark.
carriers, Admiral. I mean, I think it's brilliant what we've done in terms of the deployment. And I don't know why the government doesn't say this, because I've got no problem with it personally. Deploy 2 carriers. We're going to deploy them, if we are going to, with allies. I mean, we're not going to, for example, deploy 2 carriers with just UK F-35s. Now, I've got no problem with that, frankly, if it gets deployed with the US Marine Corps. I think that adds to our lethality, as you say, to our opponents. But I think we just need to be a bit honest about this, is that this is a great asset for our allies, it's great for the UK, but it's going to be deployed, we all know, on a joint basis. And I think that is the problem I have when some people are trying to argue that glory days of, UK steaming around the world on its own. It's not going to do that anymore, is it?
So I think we've been honest in saying that we will always have that backstop of showing to ministers that if you wanted to deploy a purely UK sovereign capability, we can. In terms of not with both carriers, only with one carrier, and with one air wing. And then in terms of the actuality of when we deploy it, do we think that we will deploy it as part of an international group? My expectation is that will be the norm.
It's not, honestly, it's not a military issue, it's a political issue. I just think we need to get it into the public psyche that this is actually a benefit in terms of deploying, in terms of a...
And I just echo that. We've said this again and again. We ask, we tell the country we need to invest money in our NHS to keep people well. We invest money in our schooling to increase skill sets. We need to invest in our military if we want to stay safe. And part of that is to be able to have a carrier strike group which is sovereign. And we're not there yet. Make that case to the British public and you will win the argument and you get support for an increased defence budget.
You don't need it.
Can we move to Type 45 procurement or repair, sorry.
Chairman, Minister, an underarm ball, pretty simple. Do you accept that a fundamental role of our armed forces is to deter war in the first instance?
Absolutely.
Good. But should deterrence fail, to fight and to win?
Absolutely.
Good. Some of us are keen WPQ tablers, as you know. So on the 14th of July...
Francois, yes.
Okay, I tabled the WPQ. The essence was, what's the seagoing status of each of the 6 Type 45 destroyers in the Royal Navy? Yeah. Answer. Defender is currently deployed as part of the carrier strike group, while Diamond has experienced some technical issues and is detached from CG21 for maintenance, inspection and defect rectification. Daring and Duncan are currently undergoing planned deep maintenance. Dauntless is undergoing a power improvement project. So at that point, of the 6 £1 billion a pop Type 45 destroyers, arguably the best ship of its class in the world when it works, one was available out of 6. Who are we going to deter with that?
Well, at the time, I think, Diamond was just catching up with CSG, was having had a short period of maintenance.
No.
So at the moment, we have 3 available. We
and
have
has
Dragon.
Detached, no, this is your answer. You said you didn't want to contradict your own answers. You just did. Has detached from CG21 for maintenance, inspection and defect rectification. At this point, she left the group and hadn't sailed to... She hadn't been fixed at that point. So you've got 1 out of 6. Who in Beijing or Moscow is going to quake at that?
It doesn't work out with the other ones, but I won't just contradict my own answer.
It was Dragon.
But right now, Dragon... So right now, Dragon is in the North Atlantic. Yes. Diamond and Defender are with CSG. Duncan is in deep maintenance. Dauntless has just finished PIP and is working up to do sea trials. Yep. And Daring will...
Sorry, I apologise. HMS Dragon is undergoing a period of planned maintenance in advance of further operational commitments. So on the 14th of July, she's undergoing planned maintenance. Sorry. Yes. So you've still only got 1 out of 6.
So we're now 3 out of 6.
No, but you were 1.
May well have been the case.
So if I'm a naval analyst in the Red Banner Northern Fleet, or I'm the equivalent in China, and I go, they've got these fantastic ships, but they spend a lot of their time guarding the quayside, I'm not going to be deterred, am I?
If you are drawing to our attention the fact that we need to have better availability on Type 45s, you are absolutely preaching to the converted.
Right. And the
so
first
we are
decade,
absolutely
and
committed to doing that.
You were directed by Secretary of State to improve naval availability. The Power Improvement Programme, right, to sort out the propulsion problems, which are not exactly a state secret, right, okay? So how long will it take to fix all 6 Type 45 destroyers?
It is
Chris,
2020.
Yeah. Go on.
You get
Yeah. So
whoever wants to take that, how long?
By 2028.
So it's going to take 7 years from today to fix some of the most vital ships in the Royal Navy.
So it's going to take that period of time because of the sequence we will put them into the PIP programme, combined with their upkeep programme, to deliver the change in their main propulsion.
If they are such vital ships, if you would ideally have 2 to escort the carrier, Admiral, ideally 2, right? Why is it taking 7 years to fix a defect that everybody's known about for donkey's years? Why can't you do it faster?
It's to match their operational requirements.
It is exactly that. I'm going back to the availability point. What I've been told is to get 4 Type 45s available to the Royal Navy from 2024 onwards. So that means at that point in time, I can have a maximum of 2 in some form of either deep maintenance or going through the power improvement programme.
Oh, well, all 4 of them have been fixed by 2024?
No.
So they might break again. All right, look, what's the cost of the power improvement programme?
So the total...
Current price is 189 million.
Well done, Minister. That was your answer on the 18th of August. Who's paying for that?
That comes out of the Royal Navy budget.
Yeah, Navy
right, okay. BAE Systems built these ships and they don't work properly. Why aren't they paying for it rather than the taxpayer? This is a BAE Systems Rolls-Royce cock-up. Why aren't they rectifying it? Why are my constituents paying taxes to solve a BAE System Rolls-Royce problem?
Unfortunately, we're reaching deep into history here, unfortunately. So I think there was a report in 2011 as to where the problems lay at that stage. And I think the view was taken in that report that decisions had been made by MOD and ministers at the time that contributed to the problems that were then being encountered by the Type 45. I'm not going to make a party political point on it. It's
not a party political argument. It's a taxpayers' money argument. Mm-hmm. Why don't the contractors go, do you know what, this was happening, let's put our hand up, we'll fix it? I mean, BAE Systems made a lot of money last year. Why don't they pay for it?
To be fair to BAE, they were not the root cause of the technical problems that Type 45 are facing. It was the decision and the technical bet we took on the propulsion system and the direction we were given by ministers.
This had never been tested before. You had something which was being used in a commercial environment to go straight forward, and then you were using it in a manner in which it had never been used before. Is that correct?
is...
Yeah, the technical term for this, I think, I'm not an engineer, but it was a complete cock-up, right? These are the most powerful air defence destroyers in the world, but they are not a deterrent and they are not a war-fighting asset if they are tied up alongside the quayside. Secretary of State directed you to fix this, and you just told us you're going to fix it in 7 years.
Can I take this? So the Secretary of State, and I welcomed it, and his challenge to us to have a more available fleet. And I think you're right to highlight that the Type 45s, they work now, but we are trying to build in additional resilience. Where I disagree with you is that they're not all broken. We want to have more resilience, and they work now.
Right,
the two ships that are with the carrier haven't gone through the PIP program. And if you look at my response to the Secretary of State, we now have 2 aircraft carriers both available and operational. We have 8 out of 12 frigates. We have 3 out of 6 Type 45s.
How many submarines?
We have
submarines?
I'm not going to go into the submarines. We have all of our OPVs, 5 out of 5. Yeah. We have 10 out of 11 MCMVs. We have 8 out of 11
These ships
RFAs.
are £1 billion
We have all of our service ships are available.
No, I'm sorry, they're £1 billion a pop. The taxpayer deserves better than this from the Royal Navy. I'm sorry, it does. What happened to Diamond? What was the problem?
Diamond suffered basically a failure of one of her gas turbines, and we had to replace it.
So it was an engine problem?
It was an engine problem.
OK, because I spoke to a journalist today who said the MOD flat denied that.
Well, I don't know who in the MOD it was, but it wasn't me, and I'm responsible for
it. It was a
ships.
propulsion problem?
It was.
OK, well, that's cleared that one up. OK, but even if we put 2 to sea to defend the carrier and 1 breaks, in terms of deterrence, they must laugh at us.
I don't think they laugh at the capabilities of Type 45.
When she's at sea. But that's the point, isn't it?
So if you're saying...
I'm saying warships have a deterrent effect if they're reliable and can go and fight First Sea Lord. They don't have a deterrent effect if they're permanently tied up along a quayside in Portsmouth.
They don't, but you're zero. So if you're saying, if we want to have an argument about what is the capability of that CSG-21 group, and what does it have, and what impact is that having in terms of China, Russia, and what have we seen when we operated in the Eastern Mediterranean? What have we seen when we've been operating in the Philippine Sea, and so on? We've got to look at it in a slightly bigger context than purely two destroyers as part of that group. We've got to look at the air wing, the carriers, the fact that these are 5th generation, the support shipping, the success of the deployment, our international allies,
first,
the submarine, all of those things.
We've given the support shipping a good go, I think, and I'm not sure you won that one on points, to be honest. I'm talking about one class of warship, and I think we find it unbelievable that it's going to take you 7 years to fix these problems when you've known about them for a decade. Can't you do better than that?
Right, final reply on this, because we need to move on to Kevin's point here. Just a final response.
I think there is absolute agreement that we want to get more availability out of our Type 45s, more reliability. That is what Pivot is designed to do, with the deep maintenance that goes alongside it.
Yeah, well,
so what the critical thing is making certain, which I've got no doubt I'll be asked questions by yourself and Mr. Jones and others about the success of Dauntless in due course, and that's what we're focusing on now, making certain that work will actually work and achieve the objectives that we set for it.
Slowly going back to the 10-year rule.
Okay, Mark, you made the point.
They'll explain to you later what that is.
Okay.
I know what the 10-year rule is.
Thank you, Minister. I'm just going to draw a line. There's a point that's been forcefully made, and so let's move on to Kevin, who's going to widen this debate on maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, you made the position very clear that you actually want to get availability up, and I think no one disagrees on that. But you're very helpful. You sent me a letter today in terms of planned maintenance availabilities and the slippage in terms of, which is not good, is it? I mean, you're talking in your letter to me, is the Royal Navy vessels 33.8%, and on extra time, and on RFA it's 33%.
On average.
On average. And I accept some of it will be down to COVID. I'm not suggesting that it's all down to COVID. Will have influenced these figures, you know. But what's the real issue here? Because, I mean, is it an issue in terms of, you also in your second letter, I'll not read them all out, but I'm sure we can put it in the report, is you've actually named the various contractors in terms of the delays in which they've got. I mean, what can be done to improve this? Because that's an issue for availability for the Admiral, isn't it? In terms of if we're putting things in planned maintenance and we're actually then having delays like this, that they're not available for actually being deployed. So what can be done to actually...
I can tell you lots of exciting things for the future in terms of the new classes. Chris, I'm sure will come into what's going on at the moment. So in the future, with the increased digitalisation, again, if you look at what they do with Type 26, the level of digitalisation, everything's down to the millimetres. In the past, a 4-inch gap and it would be someone sort that out with a hammer. These days it is to such a fine degree of specification and the inventory is digitalised that will help when we then start running that forward to working out what's wearing out where and what needs to be replaced. So in the future it will help.
That's fine for
right
26, but we're going to have a long...
and I said, my preamble said, I can talk about the future and how wonderful that will be when we have new ships, and new ships make life a lot easier. At the moment, we are maintaining some older assets and revamping them, and I think a lot of this is down to what they actually. Some of it's only a bit of it's COVID, and most of it's they take something out and they find out what's behind it, and it doesn't look good. But, Admiral Gardner.
So, I mean, I think it's absolutely fair to say that the level of productivity we currently get out of industry is not good enough. That is fundamentally behind the change we are trying to bring about and the transformation that we have enacted through the Future Maritime Support Programme that we've just led with Babcock and BAE.
Sorry, what's the issue there in terms of productivity?
So, I mean, there is just general productivity within the yard and the need to invest in tools, techniques and facilities to deliver an increase in the overall productivity. But there is also a truism in the fact that the ships that we are maintaining, the overruns on Type 23, for example, as I said earlier, are down to the overall material state of those ships, the level of obsolescence, and the degree of investment we're having to make in their life extension alongside the capability upgrades.
So you're basically saying until you actually start taking them apart, you don't know what you're finding?
That is true. When you start ripping a Type 23 apart and you start ripping down bulkheads and things, you will discover problems and emergent work that has to be fixed.
Because they're so old.
Correct.
And is it also an issue, because I remember the Type 23 is being built at Swan Hunters. Is it the fact they were built in different yards, they're apparently done to the same spec, but there might be different build finishes in terms of...
It is a truism, I believe, anecdotally, that you can tell the difference in the Type 23s depending on which yard they came out of. But I wouldn't say it's material to the sense of if you take a ship that was built in Yarrows, it'll take months longer to fix than one that was built somewhere else.
So in terms of trying to get industry to focus on this, what are you actually doing then in terms of, in terms of getting productivity, in terms of times, and what are you actually trying, you're the customer, what are you doing to actually hold their feet to the fire to say, well, we've got to try and improve these?
So, I think the key fundamental transformation commitment we have just landed through the Future Maritime Support Programme is fundamentally moving the goalposts and the mindset, and I don't underestimate the cultural journey we've got to go on with industry as well, to think about how we contract and we deliver and hold industry to account on an output basis, something we have not done in the past. The next real opportunity comes as we recapitalise the Navy, we bring new ships into service, we can invest in digitisation, we can invest in the data analytics, we can invest in adopting a fundamentally different way by adopting commercial best practice in terms of how we scale and source and support.
So your first answer, is that in English, is that basically you're saying to the contractors, if you don't hit these targets, you're not going to get paid, or penalties, or...
Yeah, so, for example, in the surface ship world, we've moved from a cost-plus model to one where we adopt a target cost incentive fee. So they are incentivised to deliver on time because that's how they maximise their profit.
So is that being brought in now in terms of trying to... So future work will be on that basis rather than the cost-plus basis? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Final question from me just on F-35s. I know, Minister, you've heard us. We're concerned that there was a initial bid for 138. We're up to 48 at the moment. There's no money available. We just talked about the pressures on budgets. You've got 21, I think, in situ now. Is that correct? 21 have been delivered. Firstly, you said you've got 2 aircraft carriers. How many F-35s do you need to operation? I'm thinking of forced effects at readiness, as to how many do you actually require to be able to allow 2 aircraft carriers to operate concurrently?
So the MOD plan has been to have 2 aircraft carriers and 1 air wing that you can then marry up with the very high readiness aircraft carrier, and that I'm trying to think whether or not the actual
24. And
it is. I'm trying to think whether or not the figure that I want to give is confidential or not. In terms of
we won't tell anybody. Just
in terms of supporting 4 squadrons,
just amongst us.
I don't know whether
but
we as you know, we are going to acquire 48. We've absolutely made it clear that we will be acquiring more. So 48 we're committed to have in service by 2025, and we will be acquiring more than that. Set that out in the IR. The exact numbers we will set out in the in 2025. The 138 number is still there. I mean, that is a defined number, and we are looking for a very long period of time keeping these aircraft carriers in operation. So I'm not dismissing that number either. We know that we've got 48 to which we're committed. We know we'll be buying more beyond that.
This goes back to the reality check and your honesty, if you like, your openness with the general public. Because if they were aware as to the pressure that you were under to be able to ensure you have the number of F-35s required to run 2 aircraft carriers, they'd be the first, the taxpayers, I'm sure, to say, make sure this money is available. Yeah. Now, the money is not available. Minister, I know you're saying we hope to get it, but it's an aspiration. The Treasury have not confirmed over the next 5 years that there's any chance of this money coming forward. So it would be in addition. It's not in the equipment plan.
Can I come in?
Kevin, do you want to come in here?
And I think it's an academic argument, this, frankly, because I think we're going to deploy them with our US allies, which, frankly, I've got no problem with in terms of it's a mixed fleet on these carriers. Personally, I think that's projecting force for NATO and ours. But when we were in the United States a couple of weeks ago, there was mention about the review going on in terms of the US Marine Corps in terms of drawing down its air assets. Is that going to have an effect in terms of deployability of US Marine Corps to supplement what we've got on our carriers? Or have you had discussions on that?
Air assets you're talking about?
Air assets.
Air assets.
No, Sid, I don't think it does, because I think some of the things that they're drawing down are not they're not in the F-35 space, and they keep those numbers up. I think to your point, are we matching what I think the department has always said, which is the carrier full operating capability matures at the end of 2024, and that is to be able to deploy 24 jets on an aircraft carrier. We're absolutely on track to be able to do that, and I think that's always been a very clear aspiration and has been laid out within the Navy. So not yet a departmental plan. Is how might we look to be able to provide a second carrier air wing, and is that in the modern world? Is that purely more jets? Or is that what I think most of us would see as being a hybrid force of both jets and drones?
A littoral.
No. In terms of drones from the aircraft carrier. So if you look at what's going on with the Air Force and their Mosquito and Lanka program, if you saw what happened in September with HMS Prince of Wales flying the first jet drone, that's the area that we want to pursue, and then we can start to give ministers choices around whether or not it might be feasible, not at the expense of buying lots of expensive aircraft even more quickly. Are there some opportunities with the cost of drones, and does it become a better offensive capability to blend drones with crewed jets, and does that then start to allow you the opportunity for 2 carrier air wings to marry up with both carriers?
Okay. No, but the point is, Admiral, I mean, being able to deploy 2 carriers with a mixture of our jets and the Americans is a force multiplier. That's something we should actually be talking about, because I think this argument about, well, it's always got to be, have 2 carriers with full of UK jets, for me, is not important. More important is actually what we're bringing to the alliance in terms of being that capability, and whether it's a mixed fleet, which we're actually working on in terms of the deployment in the southeast.
That's fine, but then be clear as to what
Well,
your intentions are. At the moment,
why I
we're
think
in
we
that.
need to be clear about it, rather than get stuck on this nonsense
Yeah.
that we're actually going to buy 138 F-35s when we aren't. It's not affordable.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Sarah just has one question, which is unrelated to maritime. Is that okay if she's able to put that? I think it's.
Yeah. C. Lloyd, you publicly acknowledged the findings of the Defence Select Committee's inquiry into women in the armed forces, and I thank you for that. Apart from legislative changes, which we will be involved with in here, when you are CDS in a month's time, how do you plan to change the terms and conditions and the culture that is inherent in the military?
Can I not give a full answer to that question, because I don't. I think it would be discourteous to the current CDS, General Sir Nick Carter, and I also have been really clear with the Secretary of State that I should wait to speak as CDS until I become CDS. But to your point, if I may, to your point of how do all of us as chiefs respond in a clearer way to a report that we all acknowledged and expose some very severe failings that we have to address and that we have to do a lot more and we have to be a lot clearer with that, I absolutely can assure you that that's something that we will look to do, and I see that as being part of my role as CDS, to lead the chiefs in responding to what you and this committee evidence in your report. But I don't want to start speaking as the next CDS
That's
when
fair.
I'm not the CDS.
I wouldn't expect you to. I was just looking for commitment.
Yes, yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
You have it.
Very, very grateful indeed. Minister, Admirals, you've excelled in your time here. Thank you so much indeed. This has been really informative, very, very constructive indeed. And I hope you understand why we raise these issues. We encourage you to be bolder in making your case, certainly to increase the defence budget, simply because we do all agree. The bigger picture is that we are living in increasingly dangerous times, and we want Britain to play an increasingly involved role on the international stage, not least in the maritime environment. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Order.
Thank you.